Hey friends. Glad you're here at Monkey D, FIC. We've cooked up something special. What if Luffy and Naruto fought each other? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1. The sky tears open. The weather on the Grand Line had never made sense, and Luffy had stopped expecting it to. One morning it rained sideways. The next, hail the size of cannonballs came down so fast Usopp built a makeshift roof out of spare sail canvas and called it his greatest invention. The morning after that, the sky turned the color of a ripe mango for 6 hours for no reason anyone could explain, and Nami had simply written anomaly in her log and moved on, because there was no other word for it. But this was different. Luffy noticed it first, the way he always noticed things, not because he was particularly observant, but because he was sitting on the figurehead of the Thousand Sunny with his legs dangling over the ocean and absolutely nothing else to do. He'd been staring at the horizon trying to decide if the blue of the water and the blue of the sky were the same blue or different blues, which was a thought he'd been turning over for about 40 minutes without making any progress on, when the crack appeared. Not a crack in the clouds. Not a break in the weather pattern. A crack in the sky itself. It started as a thin white line, like someone had dragged a fingernail across the surface of a painting and revealed the bright nothing underneath. Then it spread, 2 lines branching from the first, then 4, then 8, the whole upper right quadrant of the sky fragmenting like a mirror that had been struck at its very center. Light poured out from between the fractures, but it wasn't sunlight. It was colder than sunlight, cleaner, the kind of brightness that made your eyes water not from its intensity but from something older, something instinctual that lived in the back of your skull and said, "This is wrong, this is deeply and fundamentally wrong." Luffy tilted his head to the side. He said. Then, louder, over his shoulder. "Hey! Something's happening with the sky!" Nami was on deck in 30 seconds, log pose in hand, her expression already cycling through the 4 stages of Grand Line crisis management: denial, analysis, fury, and grim acceptance. She stopped at the railing beside the lion's head and looked up and made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Usopp arrived at a dead sprint, skidded to a halt, and immediately turned around to run again before Zoro caught him by the collar of his overalls. "It's just a thing," Zoro said, though he was watching the sky with his hand on one of his hilts. "Things happen. Things happen? Things happen?" "The sky is breaking, Zoro. The sky is actively coming apart above our heads. Stop screaming." "I'm not screaming. This is my regular voice when the sky is breaking." Robin had come up from the library below deck with a book still in her hand, a finger marking her place. She looked at the fractured sky for a long, quiet moment. "Fascinating," she said. "The light emanating from those fissures doesn't correspond to any natural phenomenon I've ever read about. The spectral quality suggests a dimensional membrane under significant stress." She turned a page. "We should probably move the ship." "Which direction?" Nami demanded. Robin considered it. "Away from directly beneath it would be my suggestion." Nami was already at the helm. Sanji materialized from the kitchen hatchway with a cigarette balanced in the corner of his mouth, looked up at the disintegrating sky, and said, "Huh," in the same tone he used when a soufflé didn't rise quite right. Chopper climbed the mast to get a better look, his little hat nearly blowing off. Frankie stood at the stern with his arms crossed, his blue hair catching the cold light from the fractures, studying the structural engineering of reality falling apart above him with what could only be described as professional curiosity. Brooke played a low, mournful note on his violin from somewhere below deck. Nobody had told him anything yet. He just seemed to know. The crack reached its maximum width, maybe 30 meters across at its broadest point, the fracture lines spreading another 50 in each direction, and then it stopped spreading. It just held there, trembling at its edges, the cold light bleeding out steadily. And then something fell through it. Not slowly. Not dramatically. Just fell, the way anything falls when gravity decides it's done waiting. It hit the ocean about 200 meters off the port side and threw up a column of white water that Luffy estimated was roughly the height of a 3-story building, though he was bad at estimating heights. The wave it kicked out rocked the Sunny hard enough that Usopp grabbed the railing with both hands and Chopper slid halfway down the mast before catching himself. The crack in the sky closed. Just like that. Folded back in on itself like the pages of a book, the fracture lines retracing their paths, the cold light withdrawing, until the sky was an ordinary Grand Line sky again, a little overcast, a little strange, but whole. Silence. Luffy was already stretching his arm back, fingers locked around the neck of the lion figurehead, his body pulled into a taut line behind him. Luffy! Nami started. There's someone out there, he said. He wasn't asking. He could feel it, that particular frequency of life that his body had always been sensitive to, long before he'd understood what Conqueror's Haki even was. Something alive had fallen out of that crack. Something with a will to match a storm. He let go. He shot across the water like a rubber bullet, body flat and streamlined, the ocean surface skimming past a foot below him. He hit the spot where the figure had gone under and plunged into the water without hesitation, despite the fact that water was, for him, somewhere between a severe inconvenience and a death sentence, because the thought process between "there's someone out there and I'm going to get them" was, for Luffy, essentially instantaneous and involved no intermediate steps. He sank like a stone, which he always did, thrashing uselessly, but his arm was still stretched, anchored to nothing, just extended in the direction he'd seen something sink, and his fingers found cloth, then an arm, then he was hauling backward with everything he had, and they both came out of the water in a low arc and landed on the deck of the Thousand Sunny in a tangle of limbs and salt water. Luffy sat up immediately, coughing. He was soaking wet and grinning. The person he pulled out of the water lay flat on their back on the deck, arms spread wide, staring up at the sky with wide blue eyes, the kind of blue that wasn't calm at all but was instead the blue of something that burned so hot it came out the other side as cold. He was maybe 17, maybe a bit older, with sun-damaged blonde hair spiked in every direction and whisker marks on both cheeks, 3 lines each side, faint but definite, like he'd been born with them or earned them very young. He wore a black coat over an orange and black outfit that had seen better days. There was a headband tied around his forehead with a metal plate engraved with a leaf symbol. His hands, when Luffy looked at them, were calloused in the specific way of someone who had been hitting things since before they were tall enough to reach the training post. He blinked at the sky for about 3 seconds. Then he sat bolt upright and immediately his hands were in a cross shape in front of him, fingers locked. Shadow Clone Jew, oh cool, Luffy said right in his face, close enough that the blonde kid startled backward and nearly fell off the deck again. What are you doing with your hands? Is that a move? The blonde kid stared at him. Water dripped from the points of his hair. He had the expression of someone who had been through a great deal this morning and was now being asked trivia questions by a rubber man in a straw hat. Who? He glanced around the deck. The entire Straw Hat crew was looking at him. Nami had the Climax in her hand. Robin was watching with polite, terrifying interest. Zoro had both hands loose at his sides. Who are you people? Where is this? Is this the ocean? Is that? He twisted around to look at the crack-free sky behind him, and his face did something complicated. The seal worked. The dimensional seal worked. Okay, I actually went through. He pressed one hand to his forehead. Kami above, it actually worked. The sky broke, Luffy said helpfully. You fell out. The blonde kid looked at him again. Stared. Then, slowly, the expression on his face rearranged itself from shock into something that might, generously, have been the beginning of amusement. He had one of those faces that seemed to default toward warmth even when the brain behind it was still catching up. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I fell out. Of the sky. He rubbed the back of his neck. This is not the weirdest thing that's happened to me this year, to be honest. Ha! Luffy slapped his knee. I like this guy. Luffy, Nami said, in the specific tone she reserved for do not adopt the strange person who just fell out of a dimensional rift. We don't know who he is. He's someone who fell out of the sky. Luffy stood up and held out his hand to the blonde kid. I'm Luffy. Monkey D. Luffy. I'm gonna be king of the pirates. The blonde kid looked at the hand for a moment. Then he took it and let Luffy haul him to his feet. Naruto, he said. Uzumaki Naruto. A beat. Then, with something that wasn't quite a smile but was working toward one. 7th Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village. Silence again, but a different kind. What's a Hokage? Luffy asked. What's a pirate? Naruto said. They looked at each other. I think, Robin said from behind them, her voice carrying its usual quality of finding disaster deeply interesting. This may take a while to explain. It took 4 hours and most of Sanji's emergency meat reserves, which Sanji surrendered with approximately the expression of someone watching their child walk into traffic, because Naruto ate the way gravity worked, constantly, naturally, and with complete indifference to obstacles. He sat at the galley table across from Luffy, and the two of them consumed enough food between them to feed a small village while somehow also managing to talk continuously, which was a physiological achievement that impressed even Frankie. Naruto told them about the elemental nations. About chakra, this life energy that ran through every living thing, which you could shape with your hands and your will into things that shouldn't be possible, like fire from nothing or 1,000 identical bodies or a sphere of rotating force that could carve through stone. He demonstrated the last one in the air above the galley table, a small raisin gan spinning in the flat of his palm, humming at a frequency that made the dishes rattle, and Luffy immediately reached for it with one rubber finger. Don't! Naruto started. The raisin gan hit Luffy's finger and spun there for a second, harmless, the rotating energy dispersed by the rubber. Luffy laughed. Naruto stared. Your hand, Naruto said. Rubber, Luffy explained. You're made of rubber. I ate a devil fruit. What's a devil fruit? What's a raisin gan? They stared at each other again. It was becoming a pattern. Okay, Naruto said. He put the raisin gan out, extinguished it as casually as blowing out a candle. You first. So Luffy explained. He was not, by any objective measure, the best at explaining things. His descriptions tended toward the gestural, the enthusiastic, and the structurally chaotic. But what he lacked in clarity he made up for in conviction, and Naruto turned out to be the exact right audience for Luffy's particular style of storytelling. Which was essentially, and then this cool thing happened, and it was really cool, and then this other thing happened, and we almost died, but it was also kind of cool. And the warlords, Naruto said at one point, interrupting not rudely but out of sheer can't-help-it curiosity. These were people your government authorized to be pirates? They just let them do pirate things in exchange for services? Yeah, but the government is terrible, Luffy said, as though this were self-evident, which to him it was. You're not wrong about governments, Naruto muttered, and for just a second something moved through his eyes, not bitterness exactly, but the memory of bitterness, the shape of something worked through and not fully forgotten. Nami was watching from across the table with her arms folded, her financial instincts at war with her genuine sociological curiosity. And you said you're the leader of your village? She said to Naruto. The Hokage. 7th one, yeah? He said it without arrogance, but also without the false modesty that came from people who secretly wanted to be asked again. He just said it the way you'd say you were a carpenter or a sailor. This is the thing I do. How old are you? Nami asked. 17. He paused. And a half. The half matters. You're leading an entire country at 17. Village. And yeah? He shrugged one shoulder. It's not. I mean, I've got people around me. I'm not doing it alone. He glanced at Luffy. You're younger than me, right? And you're already going for king of the pirates? I'm 17 too, Luffy said. See, Naruto said to Nami, gesturing at Luffy like he'd proven a point. He's not running a country, Nami said. He's trying to claim the ocean, Naruto said. That's different. Is it? Nami opened her mouth, reconsidered, and closed it. Zoro had been sitting at the end of the table this entire time, apparently asleep, his chin on his chest, 3 swords at his hip. He hadn't said a word since Naruto had arrived. But when Naruto described the fight with pain, all 6 bodies, the full assault on Konoha, the moment he'd arrived and felt the hatred rising in him like water in a flooding room, Zoro opened one eye. He looked at Naruto for a long moment with his one good eye. Then he closed it again. But his hand had moved off his sword hilt. It was, from Zoro, the equivalent of a standing ovation. The explanation of why Naruto had come through the crack in the sky was both simpler and more complicated than the rest of it. He'd been tracking an anomaly. Something the sensory division of Konoha had picked up 3 weeks prior, a distortion in the natural energy of the world, like a sound heard on the edge of hearing that you couldn't quite locate. He'd gone himself because he always went himself, because sitting in the Hokage office letting other people handle things that needed handling was something he was still learning to be comfortable with, and mostly wasn't. The dimensional seal was experimental. A joint project between him and the remaining seal masters of Konoha, based on some ancient Uzumaki research that had been half destroyed and half recovered. The theory was sound, they thought. The execution was, well. He was currently on a pirate ship in a different dimension, so the execution had some rough edges. "Can you get back?" Robin asked. She'd put her book down at some point during the Rasengan demonstration and hadn't picked it up since. Naruto was quiet for a moment. "The seal should reactivate in 72 hours, he said. "Give or take. The aperture opens from both sides on a timer, assuming the dimensional membrane stabilizes." He looked at his hands. "If I'm not near the original entry point when it opens..." He stopped. "Then you'll be stuck," Robin said gently. "Then I'll figure something else out," Naruto said, which was not an answer to her question at all, and yet somehow was completely consistent with everything they'd learned about him in the last 4 hours. Luffy, who had been eating through most of Naruto's explanation of the seal, looked up. 72 hours, he said. "Yeah. Then you're eating with us for 72 hours. He pointed at Sanji with a piece of meat. "Make more food." "I'm not your..." Sanji started. "I'll help," Naruto said, already standing, already heading toward the kitchen with the easy comfort of someone who had been cooking for himself since he was old enough to reach the stove. "I make a pretty decent ramen." Sanji stopped mid-protest and tilted his head. The word ramen had reached some deep, professional place in him. "From scratch?" Sanji asked. "From scratch," Naruto confirmed. "Sit down," Sanji said, pulling on his apron. "I'll show you how to do it correctly." The crisis, for the moment, became a cooking demonstration, because that was the kind of ship the Thousand Sunny was, and that was the kind of people the Straw Hats were. The world could be ending just over the horizon and they would still find the hour to eat a proper meal together. Night on the Grand Line came down fast and total, the kind of dark that didn't exist in most other parts of the world, a darkness with texture and weight, the stars above so numerous and so close that they seemed structural, load-bearing, like the sky needed them to hold itself up. Luffy had been on the figurehead for the better part of an hour, hat tilted back, legs swinging, staring up at the place where the crack had been. There was no sign of it now. The sky had healed over perfectly, not even a scar. He heard bare feet on the deck behind him and didn't need to look to know who it was. The weight of Naruto's presence had a specific quality, dense, restless, warmly electric. Like standing next to a bonfire that had very recently been a much larger fire. Naruto dropped down beside him on the figurehead with the comfort of someone who had grown up on rooftops. He sat cross-legged, which Luffy couldn't do because his legs kept sliding off each other, so he just kept swinging his the way he always did. For a while neither of them said anything. The ocean made its sounds. The ship creaked. Somewhere below deck, Brook was playing something slow and sweet, a melody that didn't have a name and didn't need one. "You felt it," Luffy said. Not a question. "Felt what?" "When you came through." Luffy tapped 2 fingers against his chest. "In here. Like a bell." Naruto looked at him sideways. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Like someone hit a bell." His eyes narrowed slightly. "How do you know that?" Luffy shrugged. I can feel things about people sometimes. When they've got something big in them. He tapped his chest again. You've got something big. Naruto was quiet for a moment. Then, that's Kurama. The fox? You were listening when I talked about that? I listened to everything. Luffy said serenely, which was demonstrably untrue at least 40% of the time, but seemed to be accurate in this specific instance. Naruto smiled at the water. The Nine Tails. Yeah. We share the same, we're kind of one thing now, him and me. It's complicated. He rubbed the back of his neck. He'd probably already be telling me you're an idiot for touching his energy, if he were still here to say so. The past tense landed quietly. Luffy heard it. He didn't ask about it. Some things you heard and let be. He'd learned that from Shanks, a long time ago on a dock in Fushia village, the way the old pirate could sit with a person's pain without trying to move it. Your crew, Naruto said after a while. They're all really strong. The strongest, Luffy said, with absolute singleness of mind. That green-haired swordsman. The one who looked like he was sleeping. Zoro. He wasn't sleeping. No. Luffy agreed, amused. He was measuring me. Naruto glanced back toward the ship. And then he stopped. Like he decided I wasn't a threat. He looked at Luffy again. But it wasn't because he thought I was weak. It was because he decided you were okay. Luffy said simply. Zoro doesn't care about strong or weak. He cares about what kind of person you are. Naruto was quiet again. Then, mine does the same thing. Luffy waited. Sasuke, Naruto said. My. He seemed to search for the word. He's not my crew exactly. He's not a joiner. But if you asked me who my most important person was, he'd be somewhere in the answer. A long pause. He'd probably have already tried to fight your swordsman. Zoro would have said yes. Luffy said immediately. Sasuke would have said yes before the sentence was finished. They looked at each other and both started laughing at roughly the same moment, not politely, not restrainedly, but the way you laugh when something is genuinely funny and also somehow perfect, loud and real and carrying out over the dark water, and below deck, Brook's slow melody shifted into something brighter without being told to. It was Luffy who broke the ease of it. Not deliberately. He never did things deliberately in the sense of calculation or strategy. He did them the way weather happened, because the conditions were right and something needed to move. He said, You want to fight, don't you? Naruto went very still. Not guilty still. Not caught still. Just the stillness of someone who had been thinking something and had just heard it said out loud, and was deciding whether to be honest about it. I felt it, Luffy said. When you were doing the thing with your hands in the Rasengan. You weren't showing off. You were checking what I was. He tilted his head. I do the same thing. When I meet someone strong. I can't help it. Naruto exhaled slowly through his nose. Then he leaned back on his hands and looked up at the stars. I've been Hokage for 8 months, he said. And I love it. I love the village, I love the people, I love all of it. He paused. And I haven't had a real fight since the war ended. Not one where I didn't have to hold back, or protect something, or be responsible for 100 outcomes. He looked at his open hand. I'm always responsible for 100 outcomes. Luffy watched him. And then I fall out of the sky. Naruto continued, with a quality in his voice that was either irony or wonder. The two things, for Naruto, seemed to come from the same place. Onto a ship in the middle of some crazy ocean. And there's this guy in a straw hat who caught me before I hit the deck and is in my face asking about my moves before I even know what dimension I'm in. He looked at Luffy. And I'm thinking, yeah, Luffy said. Yeah, Naruto said. They sat with the thing between them, not a threat, not a challenge, just a shared recognition, the mutual acknowledgement between two people who had both spent their lives finding each other in crowds of ordinary. You, also, are this kind of thing. Not tonight, Luffy said. No, Naruto agreed. Not tonight. But the word tonight had a shape to it. It implied a different night. It implied that the question was when, not if. Luffy grinned at the dark water. Naruto, after a moment, grinned too. The attack came at 3 in the morning. Not from Naruto. Not from any direction they'd been expecting. The first sign was the log pose going haywire, Nami's emergency barometric instruments spiking in 6 directions simultaneously, which she later said was the navigational equivalent of every alarm in a building going off at once. The second sign was the ocean going still. Not calm still, wrong still, the specific absence of wave motion that the Grand Line reserved for its worst moments. The third sign was the island. It rose from the water like something remembering it existed, not erupting, not exploding upward, but rising, steadily and with immense purpose, the way a sleeping thing stirs and finds its feet. The sea around it cascaded off its edges in white sheets. Trees appeared, ancient trees, enormous, their root systems trailing seawater. Stone formations broke the surface, followed by what looked like ruins, or perhaps buildings that were very old, or perhaps both simultaneously. It was not a small island. It rose until its lowest point was perhaps 40 feet above the waterline, and its highest peak, a single spiraling tower of dark stone at its center, reached what Nami estimated was 300 feet into the air, though her instruments were still behaving irrationally, so the estimate was approximate. It stopped rising. It sat there, equidistant from nothing, surrounded by the Grand Line ocean in every direction, and it had not been there 8 hours ago, when Naruto had fallen out of the sky. Every member of the Straw Hat crew was on deck. Naruto was beside Luffy at the bow, his hands loose at his sides, chakra moving through him in a way that he didn't deliberately activate. It was just something his body did when something felt wrong, the way a heartbeat accelerates before the brain has finished processing fear. That island, Usopp said in a voice that suggested he was about to say something impressively obvious, was not there before. Correct, Robin said. Islands don't just, apparently this one does, Nami said flatly. Frankie had the coup de burst charged and was waiting for either a command or a reason. Chopper had his rumble balls in his pocket. Sanji had his jacket off, sleeves rolled, cigarette lit from a different angle than usual, the fighting angle. Luffy was not looking at any of this. He was looking at the island. Specifically, he was looking at the single window in the spiral tower that was lit from within, warm amber light, not dramatic, not ominous, just a light in a window, the way you'd leave a lamp burning when you expected a guest. He turned to Naruto. Naruto was already looking at him. You feel that? Luffy said. Someone's up there, Naruto said. His eyes had gone very flat and very focused. And they've been waiting. This didn't just happen, this was built up to. Whoever is in that tower wanted us here first. Us specifically, Luffy said. Both of us. A beat. Cool, Luffy said. He cracked his knuckles. Wanna go check it out? Naruto looked at the tower. Looked at Luffy. At the crew watching them both. You know this might be a trap, he said. Yeah. We should probably have a plan. We'll figure it out, Luffy said, which was his plan, which had always been his plan, which had, against all reasonable probability, always worked. Naruto pinched the bridge of his nose. Fine, he said. Fine. Let's go. Behind them, the Straw Hats moved to follow, because that was what they did. They followed their captain into the impossible and the unplanned and the potentially disastrous, not because they thought it would be easy, but because they had chosen this man and this ship, and that choice carried its own kind of gravity. The island sat on the water and waited for them, the amber light burning steadily in its highest window. Somewhere inside the tower, a scholar opened his eyes. He had been watching, from the moment the sky tore open. He had been watching from before that, watching both of them, in their own worlds, for a long time, poring over the data of their lives the way a cartographer studies a coastline before deciding where to build a harbor. He set down his pen. He smiled very slightly, the way you smile when a long and complicated calculation finally resolves into a clean, inevitable answer. So, Rick Vale said quietly to the empty room. Both of them. Together. Faster than I expected. He folded his hands on the desk before him. Good. We haven't much time. Outside, the Thousand Sunny crossed the water toward the island's shore. The amber light did not waver. The night held its breath. Chapter 2. The island that shouldn't exist. The shore of Miravel, though none of them knew its name yet, was made of black sand. Not the romantic kind that tropical islands sometimes had, smooth and dark and warm underfoot. This was black in the way that charcoal was black, fine-grained and slightly luminescent, as though the sand itself had been burned at some point in its history so thoroughly that it had never fully recovered the ability to reflect light correctly. It crunched differently too. Denser. Like walking on a surface that was pretending to be sand but was actually something else, something that hadn't quite finished deciding what it wanted to be. The Thousand Sunny's anchor hit bottom in about 12 feet of water, and Nami declared the depth acceptable for the auxiliary boat, which took 4 minutes to lower, and exactly 0 minutes for Luffy to use, because he'd already grabbed the anchor chain with both hands and swung himself to shore before anyone finished the sentence about the auxiliary boat. He landed in a crouch on the black sand, straightened up, and looked around with his hands on his hips. The island was vast. From this angle, the spiral tower at its center was even more imposing, a column of dark stone that tapered as it climbed, wound around by what looked like petrified vines the diameter of ship masts, the amber light in its high window a warm and steady point against the pre-dawn sky. Around the base of the tower, the island spread in every direction, dense forest of trees Luffy couldn't name, white-barked and high-canopied, their leaves catching the fading starlight and turning it silver. Ruins threaded through the tree-line, low walls, archways, the suggestion of streets in the way certain clearings lined up too neatly to be natural. Stone lanterns, dark and cold, stood at intervals along what had once been a road. A civilization had existed here. It was very old, and it was very gone. Naruto landed beside him a second later, not having needed the anchor chain. He'd simply walked across the water in that way he had, the chakra in his feet making the surface firm enough to bear him, which Luffy had watched from the figurehead with intense focused appreciation for approximately 4 seconds before trying to do it himself and sinking immediately. Naruto had pulled him out before anyone else noticed. "I can't walk on water," Luffy had said, in the tone of someone filing this information away for future reference. "You jumped on an anchor chain instead," Naruto had said. "Yeah. That also worked. Everything works if you commit," Luffy had said, which Naruto had thought about for a moment before nodding slowly like someone having a small revelation. Now they stood together on the black sand and the rest of the crew came ashore: Zoro, Nami, Usopp, Sanji, Chopper, Robin, Frankie, Brook, all of them materializing from the darkness in varying states of alertness. Robin had brought a second book. Usopp had brought every weapon he owned +3 he'd invented that morning. Brook had his cane sword. Frankie was making a low mechanical sound in his chest that meant his internal systems were running hot, which was either excitement or a power surge, and with Frankie was difficult to distinguish. Nami was already studying the ruins with her log pose held level, watching its needle with the focus of a doctor monitoring a heartbeat. The needle was spinning. Not slowly and not rhythmically, it was rotating in random directions at random speeds, which meant the island had no magnetic signature her instruments could lock onto, which was not how islands were supposed to work. "This island doesn't exist," she said. "We're standing on it," Usopp said. "I'm aware of what we're doing. I'm saying that navigationally, cartographically, physically, this island should not be here. It's not charted. It appeared in 6 hours. And it's producing no magnetic signature that makes any navigational sense." She lowered the log pose slowly. "Islands on the Grand Line require significant geological time to develop their unique magnetic fields. This island has the field of something that formed, or arrived, very recently. Like it came from somewhere else," Robin said. "Like it was placed," Nami corrected. "Placed." The word sat differently than arrived. It implied intention. It implied someone who did the placing. Naruto had his eyes half closed. He wasn't looking at anything specific, he was sensing. Luffy had worked this out about 20 minutes into knowing him. The way Naruto would occasionally go quiet and still in a way that wasn't his natural kind of quiet and still, his awareness spreading outward from himself like ripples on water. Sage mode, he'd explained later, over dinner. Natural energy. Like listening to the island breathe. One person, Naruto said. In the tower. No one else on the island, or if there is anyone else, they're not registering as living, which is its own problem. Sanji said. Yeah. Naruto opened his eyes. Whoever it is, they're completely calm. No fear response at all. No elevated heart rate, no adrenaline. Just, he paused. Waiting. Very patiently. Very specifically for us to arrive. Both of us? Luffy said. Both of you. Naruto confirmed, and the you had a quality to it that caught Nami's attention, the way the slight shift in emphasis caught the trained ear of someone who had been reading rooms since childhood. She looked at Naruto. Then at Luffy. Then back at the tower. Nobody's going into that tower alone, she said. Obviously, Luffy said. He was already walking toward the treeline, toward the old road, toward the tower at the island's heart. His hands were in his pockets and his hat was pulled low, and he was moving at the pace he used when he was interested but not yet urgent, unhurried, alert, certain of his direction. Naruto fell into step beside him without being asked. The crew followed. The old road was easier to follow once they were inside the forest, because the trees on either side of it were different from the trees between. Closer together, their white bark marked at regular intervals with symbols that had been cut deeply into the wood. Not painted, not burned, but carved by someone who had been determined that whatever message they were leaving would outlast the medium. Robin touched one as she passed it, her fingers tracing the form, and something moved through her face, not quite recognition, but the shadow of it. These symbols, she said, speaking partly to herself. They're not any script I know. But the structure, the grammar of them, if you can call it that, is old. Older than the void century. Frankie whistled low. There was a civilization here, Robin continued, looking at the next marked tree and the next. Substantial, long established. They had a written language with complex grammatical structures, which means they had literature, which means they had history, which means they had something worth recording. Zoro said. Robin looked at him. Exactly. What happened to them? Chopper asked quietly. Robin was quiet for a few steps. Whatever happened to them? She said. The person at the top of that tower knows. The forest opened onto a courtyard. Or what had been a courtyard, a broad circular space, perhaps 100 meters across, paved in the same dark stone as the tower, the paving cracked and reclaimed in places by growth, white-rooted things pushing up through the joins. At the center of the courtyard, directly before the tower's entrance arch, was a fountain that had dried centuries ago, its basin still perfect, its carved central figure, a person with arms raised and palms upward, face tilted toward the sky, still intact. The tower's entrance arch was open. No door. No barrier. Just an arch of dark stone, and beyond it, the amber-lit interior of a spiral staircase. Luffy stopped at the edge of the courtyard. Not from caution, or not purely from caution. He stopped because something about the courtyard felt like it wanted him to stop, the way certain rooms had a quality of accumulated significance that hit you in the chest before you'd fully entered them. He looked at the carved figure in the fountain. Arms raised. Palms up. It's welcoming someone, he said. Or surrendering, Usopp offered from behind him. No, Luffy said. Look at the face. They looked. The carved face was tilted upward and the expression, weathered as it was, worn by years and water and the particular erosion of absence, was undeniable. It was joyful. Whatever this carved figure was doing with its raised hands and its upturned face, it was not afraid of what it was receiving. Offering, Robin said softly. It's an offering. Luffy looked at the arch, looked at the light beyond it. Then he walked through. The staircase wound upward for longer than the tower's exterior should have allowed. Luffy counted his steps for about 30 of them and then stopped because the numbers stopped feeling meaningful, the way distances sometimes stopped feeling meaningful in places that were structured by intention rather than by natural physics. The walls of the staircase were lined with shelves, and the shelves held books, thousands of them, small and large, bound in materials that were clearly not leather, and clearly not paper, and clearly not any substance that any of them could name. Some of them were open. Some of them had objects pressed between their pages as markers: a feather, a stone, a piece of folded cloth, a dried flower that had been red once and was now just the color of old memory. "Someone lives here," Chopper said, reaching for one of the books and then stopping himself. "Someone studies here," Robin corrected. She stopped and looked at a particular shelf, tilting her head to read the spine of a book that was larger than the others. Her expression went through something complicated, and she kept moving without comment, which was its own kind of comment. Naruto was reading the chakra sense like a map. "We're almost there," he said, to no one specifically, to all of them. "He's right above us." Still calm. Still. A pause. Interested. "He's interested. That's the closest word I have." "In us?" Sanji said. "In them," Naruto said, nodding toward Luffy's back. Luffy, who was several steps ahead, didn't react to this. But he'd heard it. He heard everything. The staircase ended. The room at the top of the tower was circular, wide enough that 12 people could stand in it with room to breathe. The shelves continued up here, more densely packed, 2 layers deep, books and objects and folded papers and things in glass containers and things in no container at all, simply resting on the wood as though they'd been set down a moment ago, and would be picked up again shortly. A single large desk dominated the center of the room, angled to face the door, or rather, the point where a door would be, because there was no door up here either, just an open arch. The amber light came from a lamp on the desk, oil burning, simple, its glow warm and humanizing in a room that might otherwise have felt archival and cold. Behind the desk sat a man. He was not what any of them had been braced for. He was perhaps 50, with the quality of agelessness that came not from youth preservation but from a face that had never been particularly young, angular, well-structured, with deep-set eyes of a color that shifted between gray and green depending on how the lamplight hit them. His hair was silver and cut close, and he wore plain clothes, a scholar's clothes, ink-stained at the cuffs, comfortable in the manner of garments that had been selected purely for function long enough that function had become their aesthetic. His hands, folded on the desk, were a writer's hands. Long-fingered. Steady. He was looking at Luffy and Naruto with an expression of such genuine, unguarded relief that it was almost jarring. Not the relief of a desperate person. The relief of someone who had been working towards something for a very long time and was now watching the final piece settle into place. "Captain Monkey D. Luffy," he said. His voice was measured, precise, not cold but shaped. The voice of someone who had spent their life choosing words carefully. "And Hokage Uzumaki Naruto." He inclined his head. "I was beginning to think the aperture would collapse before either of you arrived." The dimensional engineering involved in that particular coincidence was... He stopped himself. "Forgive me. I have a habit of leading with methodology when I should lead with introduction." He stood. "I am Rick of Vale. Please sit. All of you if you like. There is more seating than it appears, the shelves pull out." Nobody sat. He looked at them all with mild, patient eyes. "Of course," he said, and sat back down himself. "Ask your questions? I'll answer everything." "You built this island," Luffy said. He wasn't asking. "I assembled it," Rick of Vale said. "There's a distinction, though I understand why it might not seem meaningful. The island existed elsewhere, or rather, the pieces of it existed, scattered across a third-dimensional plane that no longer has inhabitants to object to my borrowing them." He touched the desk with one fingertip. "The materials are genuine. The geology is real. The history you'll find in those ruins is authentic. I simply relocated it to the intersection point of your 2 dimensions." "Why?" Naruto said. "Because both of your worlds are merging. Rika said, with the same tone he'd used to say because it was raining. And the intersection point required a fixed node. A location both realities could agree on. Without one, the merging process becomes. He considered his next word. Catastrophic is accurate. Dissolution might be more precise. Two-dimensional planes interpenetrating without a fixed node produces a cascade of reality instability that our worlds are merging, Nami said. Her voice was very controlled. You're saying our worlds are merging. Have been merging. Rika corrected gently. For approximately 4 months, from the perspective of linear time as your dimensions experience it. The tear your young captain observed this morning was not the beginning. It was the first point at which the process became visible to the naked eye. He opened a large book on his desk, flat, a spread of diagrams that none of them could read clearly from where they stood, concentric circles and lines and annotated measurements. I have been monitoring both worlds since the process began. And you didn't warn anyone? Nami said, her voice climbing. I warned no one. He agreed undefensively. Because warning would not have stopped the merging, and would have caused widespread panic in 2 separate civilizations, and the panic itself would have accelerated the instability. He looked at her with a complete absence of guilt. I calculated the cost against the benefit and chose accordingly. Nami had the Climact in her hand. Riku did not appear to notice. What's the fixed node? Robin said. She'd been standing at the edge of the room, reading the spines of books, and she spoke without turning around. You said the island is the fixed node. But a piece of rock can't anchor 2-dimensional planes. Rika looked at her with an expression of precise, undisguised respect. You're correct, he said. The island is a structure. A location. The anchor requires something else. He paused. Something alive. Something with a will powerful enough to hold the intersection point stable while the merging completes. The room went very quiet. Outside, wind moved through the white-barked trees. One person, Robin said. Still not turning around. Or 2. Rika looked at Luffy. Then at Naruto. He placed his fingertips together and said quite calmly, That's what I need to determine. Luffy had been looking at Rika for this entire exchange with an expression that was not unreadable. It was just not what most people expected to see on someone receiving the information that their world might be ending. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't angry. He was thinking, in the particular way he thought, which involved his whole body, his whole attention, an absolute presence in the moment that his crew had learned over years to recognize as one of the most dangerous things about him, because it meant he was going to do something, not say something, and whatever he did would be entirely undeniable. You want us to fight? Luffy said. Riku did not look surprised that he'd arrived there so quickly. Yes. To find out which one of us is stronger. More precisely, to find out which will is more fundamental. Strength is a component of will, but not its entirety. Riku set down his pen. I have studied both of you extensively. You are the 2 most significant sources of life force in your respective worlds. The one whose will proves more durable would serve as the anchor alone. The other would return to their world, which would then complete its separation from the merged plane cleanly. And if either of us wins, Naruto said. His voice was very quiet and very flat. Then the merging continues without resolution, Rika said. And both worlds dissolve, Robin said. She had turned around now. You said dissolve? Yes, Rika said. Silence. Zoro made a sound that was not quite a word and looked at the floor and then at Luffy and then at the floor again, which for Zoro constituted a significant emotional response. Usopp had sat down on a pulled-out shelf section, not as an invitation but because his legs had suggested it might be a good idea. Chopper had his hands pressed against his face. Sanji lit a second cigarette off the first. Naruto's jaw was set. Luffy had noticed that about him. When something landed hard, he didn't show it in his face first, he showed it in the line of his jaw, the slight forward tilt of his head, as though walking into a wind. There's something you're not telling us, Luffy said. Rika looked at him. The scholar's face moved, very slightly. Several things, he admitted. Though not things I am hiding. Things that are contextually complex. I had planned to introduce them sequentially. Skip the sequence, Luffy said. Say all of it. Another tiny shift. Something that wasn't quite admiration but was in that neighborhood. The merging process has a secondary effect on living beings from both planes who are in proximity to the intersection node, Rika said. A gradual but increasing pressure on memory. On connection. The longer residents of each world remain in the intersection zone. He touched the desk. They will begin to lose their sense of home. Their concrete memory of the people and places that ground them. It is not permanent if they return in time. But if the merging is not resolved, our crews, Nami said. Her voice had changed. It had gone past anger into something quieter and harder. You're saying our crews will start forgetting. Our friends. Our families. The people who ground you to your worlds, Rika said. Yes. Nami turned to Luffy. Her expression was the one she reserved for decisions that were already made. How long? Luffy said. Before the effects become significant? Given the current rate of merging. Rika consulted the book in front of him. Perhaps 2 days. For mild effects. Progressive from there. And the fight, Naruto said. If the fight resolves it. How fast? Immediate stabilization. The anchor is established the moment one will definitively yields. He said the last word carefully, like it was the precise word and not the comfortable one. Yields. Not loses. Not dies. Luffy caught that distinction. He held it. Okay, he said. Okay? Nami said. We're not fighting tonight. He turned to his crew. And nobody's forgetting anything. He said it the way he said everything he meant completely, without performance, without emphasis, just as a fact, a statement of what would be true because he had decided it would be true, with a completeness of conviction that made the air in the room feel different. Come on. Let's go look at the island. He walked back through the arch and onto the staircase. After a moment, his crew followed. Naruto was last. He stood in the archway and looked at Rika Vale, who was watching the departure with the same precise, patient attention with which he seemed to watch everything. You're not wrong about the stakes, Naruto said. But you haven't considered every option. I have considered. Rika began. You've considered the options you know about, Naruto said. From studying us. From the outside. He tapped 2 fingers against the side of his head, just briefly. That's different from knowing us. He stepped through the arch. Then, from the staircase, his voice carried back clearly. Make some tea or something. This is going to take longer than 1 night. Rika stared at the empty archway. Then, for the first time since the island had risen from the ocean, he looked uncertain. Just briefly. Just a flicker. Then his scholar's face settled back into patience, and he reached for his pen. Dawn broke over Mirabel the way it broke everywhere on the Grand Line, abruptly, completely, as if light had decided enough was enough and arrived all at once rather than gradually. The sky went from the deep blue-black of almost night to a clear, brilliant gold in the time it took Senji to boil water, and the white-barked trees of the forest caught it and threw it back transformed, amber now, warm, their silver leaves giving up their nighttime quality for something that was almost festive. Luffy was already gone by the time most of the crew finished the climb back down. Naruto found him at the edge of the ruins, sitting on a low wall, eating something he'd apparently found on the island, a fruit of some kind, round and deep red, which Nami would later categorically confiscate from him because eating unidentified vegetation on an island that should not exist was, she explained, a bad plan on every possible level. A speech which Luffy listened to with his whole face, and then agreed with completely, and then the next time anyone looked at him he had another one. How long have you known? Naruto said, sitting beside him on the wall. That we were going to have to fight? That someone was going to ask you to? Luffy considered this. He chewed his fruit. Since last night, he said. On the figurehead. When I thought about it. We said not tonight? Yeah. Luffy tossed the core of the fruit in a high arc and it disappeared into the white trees. But I was already thinking about it. He looked at Naruto. You were too. Obviously, Naruto said. So the question isn't if, Luffy said. No. The question is what we do with the time before it. Luffy looked out at the ruins, at the long avenue of dead stone lanterns, at the crumbled archways and the overgrown streets. I want to explore this place. Naruto looked at the ruins too. Yeah, he said slowly. Yeah, me too. And I want to understand what he's actually asking, Luffy said, and his voice had a quality that was not loud and was not soft but was entirely clear. Because I don't think he's told us all of it yet. And I want to know what the part is that he hasn't told us. Naruto was looking at the side of Luffy's face. He was doing it with a particular expression, the one that appeared, Luffy had noticed, when someone surprised him not with power but with accuracy. You noticed that too, Naruto said. He said yields, Luffy said. Not loses. A beat. Yeah, Naruto said. He said yields. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. In my world, I've met people who've tried to solve giant problems by finding the one variable they think matters most and forcing everything to be about that variable. They're usually either geniuses or idiots, and sometimes both. He looked at the tower. Rikavale is very clearly not an idiot. Which means he's been a genius long enough to stop being able to see the shape of his own blind spots. He thinks this is only about which one of us is stronger, Luffy said. Right. But he's already decided it matters that both of us exist, Luffy said. Otherwise he wouldn't have needed both of us here. He could have just picked one. Naruto went very still for a second. Then he turned his head and looked at Luffy with an expression that was specific and complicated and might, in another language, have translated roughly as, okay, I understand what kind of person you are. You figured that out fast, Naruto said. I'm bad at a lot of things, Luffy said simply. I'm not bad at people. They explored the ruins in pairs, roughly, the way the crew naturally distributed themselves, Zoro and Frankie following the longest avenue to see where it led, Robin and Nami moving carefully through what appeared to have been a civic building of some significance, its columns still largely standing, its interior floor a mosaic in black and white stone. Usopp and Chopper found what appeared to be an old marketplace, the stall frames still upright in several places, the remnants of a well at the center still functional, the water that came up from it clear and cold and tasting of minerals. Brooks sat in the courtyard with the fountain and played. He didn't play anything dramatic. He played the kind of music he played when he was thinking about someone he'd lost, which was gentle and long-phrased and very beautiful, and it moved through the ruins and out into the white trees and was heard by everyone without interrupting anything, the way good music worked. Luffy and Naruto went to the far edge of the island. The far edge was a cliff, sheer and high, dropping to the ocean far below, and from it you could see in every direction, the flat plate of the Grand Line Sea, the thousand sunny small and perfect at anchor below, the clouds building on the southern horizon in the particular formation that Nami would later identify as a weather system moving at an unusual speed. Beyond the clouds, barely visible, a smear of deeper darkness that might have been another island. Or might have been the edge of something. In my world, Naruto said, standing at the cliff's edge with the casual relationship with heights that seemed to characterize people who had spent their childhoods jumping across rooftops. After the war, everyone wanted peace to mean still. Quiet. Normal. He looked at the water below. And I got it for them. The village rebuilt. Trade opened up. The Great Shinobi War was the last war. Really, genuinely the last one. And I know that sounds like something people say, but... He stopped. We built something that might actually hold. But... Luffy said. But I'm not built for still. Naruto said, and his voice didn't apologize for it. It just stated it. I'm built for this. For the thing where you don't know what happens next and the stakes are real and you're moving fast enough that you have to trust your body. He looked at his hands. The village needs a Hokage who's present. Who's planning? Who's patient? A pause. I'm learning to be that person. Genuinely. But I fell through a dimensional crack at 3 in the morning while tracking an anomaly personally instead of sending a division, so. He made a gesture that encompassed the whole situation. Luffy laughed. Not unkindly. In the way he laughed at things that were exactly what they were. My crew tells me I'm reckless. Luffy said. Nami does. Every day. Sometimes twice. Are you? Yes, Luffy said, without any qualification whatsoever. But so far it's working. That's not a plan, Naruto said, smiling. No, Luffy agreed. But it's a life. He looked out at the ocean. I sailed into the Grand Line before I had a crew. I fought warlords before I knew how to control Hokage. I went to Marineford too. He stopped for a moment. Just a moment. People told me it was reckless every time. And maybe it was. He pulled his hat down slightly, a gesture so habitual it had become nearly unconscious. I don't have a plan for getting stronger or getting better or figuring out what I don't know. I just go forward. And the things I need to learn show up when I need to learn them. That actually terrifies me, Naruto said. From a strategic standpoint. I know, Luffy said, grinning. And that's why it works. Because nobody can plan for it. Naruto stared at him for a second. Then he started laughing, really laughing, the full body kind that you couldn't really perform, the kind that happened to you. It was a great laugh. Loud and unself-conscious and real, and it went out over the cliff edge and down to the ocean and seemed to come back slightly changed, the way sound changed when it had traveled somewhere and returned. Below them, on the Thousand Sunny, Usopp looked up from the deck and said, Is someone laughing up on that cliff? And Zoro, passing him with a water jug, said, Sounds like the captain. And Usopp said, But who's laughing with him? And Zoro paused, listened, and said, Someone who's going to be trouble. And Usopp said, Great. Wonderful. That's exactly what we needed. And Zoro, who was already moving on, said quietly, Yeah, in a tone that sounded less like sarcasm and more like something he meant. By midday, Nami had laid out a working map of the island on the Sunny's deck, assembled from the sketches she'd made that morning and the ones Robin had contributed, and it was clear from the map that Miravel was not random. The roads radiated from the tower in a pattern that was either mathematical or astronomical, probably both, and the ruins fell into districts, residential, civic, something that might have been a research area based on the number of small, enclosed buildings Robin had found there. And at the western edge of the island, away from the cliff face, a structure that none of them had reached yet, large, low-roofed, its entrance facing directly toward the tower as though in deliberate alignment. Temple, Robin said, tracing it on the map. Or a council hall. The alignment suggests ceremonial significance. Let's go tonight, Luffy said. Tonight, Nami repeated, looking at the island, looking at the tower, looking at the map. Not the tower first. Not finding out what Rikku actually wants before we go further into this island. She set her pen down on the map. Luffy. He'll tell us when he's ready. Luffy said. We're not ready yet either. We're not. She stopped. Looked at him. What does that mean? It means I don't know yet what I'm going to do, Luffy said honestly. So I can't have the rest of the conversation with him yet. I need to know what this place is first. He looked at the island. This place matters. I can feel it. The island it's part of the answer, I think. Nami stared at him for a long moment. Then she picked her pen back up. Tonight, she said, writing it on the map. Temple. Luffy grinned. He stood, stretched, pulled his hat down, and turned toward the kitchen, because it was midday and he had done an enormous amount of thinking this morning by his own standards, and thinking at this volume required significant caloric compensation. Naruto was already in the kitchen doorway, having apparently reached the same conclusion by a different route. Sanji! Luffy yelled. Don't yell, Sanji said, from inside the kitchen, calmly, the sound of a ladle on the side of a pot punctuating the words. I already started. Sit down. Luffy sat down. Naruto sat across from him. They looked at each other across the galley table in the midday light coming through the porthole, and neither of them said anything, but the thing that had been between them since last night on the figurehead was still there, sharper now, more defined, the shape of it made clearer by the morning's conversation. Not a threat. Not quite a promise. Something in between. Something that required resolution, and both of them knew it, and neither of them was going to rush it. The ladle rang against the pot again. Somewhere above them, on the deck, Brook began to play again. The island sat in the water around the ship, patient as old stone, as full of its unspoken history as a letter sealed and waiting for its reader. And in the tower, at his desk, Rickavalve turned a page and wrote a number in the margin, a calculation, running again, approaching a certainty he had been building toward for months, and the amber lamp burned on, steady and warm, and did not waver. Chapter 3. The ground shakes. The temple had no roof. It had clearly once had one. The column stumps around the perimeter were too regular, too evenly spaced to be anything other than the skeleton of a former structure, and the stone floor inside was lighter in color than the stone outside, protected from centuries of weather by something that had since collapsed or been deliberately removed. But now the temple was open to the night sky, and the effect of it was less ruined than intentional, as if whoever had designed it had always meant for this moment to arrive. The stars overhead, the black sand of Miravel outside the perimeter columns, the white trees pressing in close on three sides. And in the center of the floor a circular mosaic that the starlight hit at an angle that made it look like it was generating its own faint luminescence. Robin crouched at the mosaic's edge with her lantern held low. The mosaic showed two figures. Standing opposite each other, their arms at their sides, not in combat postures but close. The weight distribution of the carved forms was the weight distribution of people who had been in combat, and had chosen to stop. Between them, where the mosaic's center point fell, a single symbol was inlaid in what appeared to be white stone, or something that had once been white and was now the color of old bone. This symbol, Robin said. She traced the air above it, not touching. It appears on the trees. On the wall carvings in the civic quarter. She stood. It's not decorative. It's a word. The same word, repeated everywhere, in every context. She looked at Luffy. I think it means something like resolve. Or more precisely, the resolution that comes after two forces meet and neither destroys the other. The crew stood around the mosaic in a loose ring, lanterns casting everything in warm moving amber. Naruto was on the opposite side of it from Luffy, looking at the two figures, and his expression was doing something careful and controlled that suggested a thought he wasn't ready to say yet. The people who built this place, Nami said slowly. They built a temple to this specific moment. To two people fighting, Usopp said. To two people resolving, Robin corrected. There's a distinction. Usopp looked at the two carved figures. Okay, but they're definitely about to fight. Yes, Robin said. And the civilization built a temple to what happens after. She turned to look at the tower, visible over the treetops, the amber window steady. Which raises an obvious question about Rickavalve's civilization. The question sat in the air. Nobody asked it aloud because Robin had already asked it completely by naming it as a question. Luffy was still looking at the mosaic figures. He'd been looking at them since they arrived, with that specific quality of attention he gave to things that were trying to tell him something he didn't quite have the language for yet. His head was tilted to one side. The lantern light caught the underside of his hat brim and threw a stripe of shadow across his eyes. These two people, he said. Do you think they knew each other first? Robin looked at the mosaic again. The body language suggests. She studied it. Yes. I think they did. Luffy nodded slowly. Something settled in him. Not a decision, not quite, but the piece of a decision, the part that clicks into the frame before you understand what the whole picture will be. He looked up at Naruto. Naruto was already looking at him. They were alone by midnight. Not because the crew had been dismissed. Luffy didn't dismiss his crew, they weren't that kind of operation. but because there was a quality to the silence between the two of them that the crew recognized without needing to discuss it. The same way you didn't walk into a room where two people were having the conversation that mattered. You found somewhere else to be. Nami took the others back to the ship, which was practical because someone should be watching the vessel, and also because Nami understood that some things needed space to happen, and creating that space was its own form of contribution. Zoro went last. He stood at the temple's edge for a moment, looking back at the two of them, Luffy at the mosaic, Naruto at the columns, and he had an expression that Luffy had only seen a handful of times, always at significant moments, always when Zoro had arrived at something true. He didn't say anything. He turned and walked into the white trees and the darkness took him. The night insects of Miravel made sounds that weren't quite like any insect sounds from either world, something between a chirp and a tone, rhythmic, steady, coming from the direction of the white trees. Luffy sat cross-legged on the mosaic. Naruto sat on a column stump across from him. They'd taken two of the lanterns from the crew, and the light between them was warm and small, surrounded by the vast arc of the roofless temple and the star-heavy sky above. "Rick Vale is going to push this," Naruto said. "He's patient, but he has a deadline, and he's calculating. He'll give us a little more time and then he'll apply pressure." "Yeah," Luffy said. "Which means we should decide what we're doing before he decides for us." "Yeah," Luffy said again. Naruto looked at him. "You already decided." "I decided a while ago," Luffy said. "I'm waiting for you." Naruto was quiet for a moment. The insectones from the trees rose and fell. "What did you decide?" "That I want to fight you," Luffy said. "Not because Rika says so? Not because of the worlds or the merging or any of that." He looked at Naruto with the full, uncomplicated directness that was the most consistent thing about him. "Because you're the most interesting person I've met in a long time. And I can't think of a better way to know you." Something moved through Naruto's face. Not surprised, he'd been moving toward this, they both had, since the figurehead last night, since the cliff this morning. But hearing it said plainly, without dressing or strategy, hit differently than knowing it was coming. "That's the most honest reason anyone's ever given me for wanting to fight," he said. "What's yours?" Luffy said. Naruto looked at the mosaic between them, at the two carved figures with their fighter's weight and their non-combat stance. "Because you're the only person I've met who I think could actually make me go all the way," he said. "And I haven't had that in a long time. Maybe ever." He looked at Luffy. "I don't want to hurt you." "I don't want to hurt you either," Luffy said. "But I'm not going to hold back." "Neither am I," Naruto said immediately. "Good." Luffy stood up. He pulled his hat off and set it down on the mosaic, in the center, on the symbol that Robin had translated as resolve. He rolled his neck once, slowly, and the sound of it was very loud in the quiet temple. "Then let's go." Naruto stood. His hands came up in front of him and then dropped, not into a fighting stance yet, but the gesture of someone putting down the last thing they were carrying before they began. "Rules?" he said. "None," Luffy said. Naruto smiled. Not the warm, default smile he wore in conversation. This was something sharper and more honest. The smile of a person who had been waiting, for a very long time, for someone to say exactly that. "Okay," he said. "None." Naruto moved first. Not with a technique, just movement, pure and direct, crossing the mosaic floor in a straight line at a speed that was genuinely startling even knowing what he was. His fist came up in a right hook aimed at Luffy's jaw, no build-up, no telegraphing, just the committed straight-line violence of someone who had been in enough fights to know that the best first move was usually the simplest one. Luffy's head stretched back on his rubber neck and Naruto's fist passed through the space where it had been, the wind of it strong enough to knock loose a strand of black hair, and Naruto was already pivoting into a follow-up, left elbow, close range, going for the sternum. Luffy caught it. Or rather, his chest caught it, and the elbow sank into rubber and stopped, and Naruto felt the strange wrongness of striking something that absorbed rather than resisted, and that half-second of recalibration was exactly long enough for Luffy to grab his wrist and pull. Naruto went with the pull rather than against it, let his body flow in the direction of force, the way close combat training dictated, and used the momentum to vault over Luffy's shoulder, twisting in the air, landing on the column stump 6 feet away without a sound. Luffy was already facing him, both of them breathing normally. First exchange complete. Naruto tilted his head slightly. Rubber body. Can't be hit by blunt force. Can be hit by things with enough intent. Luffy said. Haki. I don't have haki. No, Luffy said. But you've got something. Naruto looked at his hand. Chakra moved under his skin, visible at the edges, blue-white, faintly luminescent. He shaped it without the hand seals, the way he'd learned to do years ago, building the sphere in the flat of his palm in under a second. The Rasengan. It was larger than the table demonstration version. It filled his whole hand, rotating with a sound like a sustained note, the compressed energy making the air around it behave strangely, warping slightly, the lantern flame in the background bending toward it like a plant toward light. Luffy looked at it with honest, genuine interest. Will that one go through rubber? Let's find out, Naruto said, and threw himself forward. The Rasengan hit Luffy square in the chest. The result was not what either of them expected. The rotating energy didn't penetrate, because rubber dispersed the directional force of it, but the compression was substantial enough that Luffy went backward faster than he'd intended, skidding across the mosaic floor, heels dragging. He caught himself at the far edge and stood up and looked at the scorch mark on the front of his vest where the Rasengan had spun against him. He said. It's not just rotation, Naruto said. It's compressed natural energy. The dispersion characteristic of rubber might not be enough if I push the density. Then push it, Luffy said. Naruto exhaled. He brought both hands together and the Rasengan grew, the diameter of it doubling, then tripling, the sound of it rising from a sustained note to something lower and more resonant, the air around it no longer just bending but actively distorting, the lantern going out 6 feet away from the disruption to its fuel supply. Big ball Rasengan. He held it for 3 full seconds, making sure Luffy could see it, could understand its size, could make an informed choice. Luffy saw it. He grinned. He drew his arm back, stretching it behind him until it had covered 20 feet of distance, his body torquing, the whole structure of him becoming a spring under tension. Goma Goma no! The big ball Rasengan hit him again. And this time it moved him, picked him up entirely and threw him backward through one of the column stumps, which exploded into gravel, and through the gap and out into the black sand of the island beyond the temple perimeter. He hit the ground, rolled, came up in a shower of dark sand. Bazooka! He finished, and the delayed cannon shot of both fists coming together hit Naruto in the center of the chest and sent him in the opposite direction, backward into the white trees at the temple's edge. A tree cracked. Bark and silver leaves rained down. Silence. Then Naruto walked out of the tree-line, rubbing his sternum, spitting out a piece of leaf. His coat was partially torn at the left shoulder. Luffy walked back in from the black sand. His vest had 2 circular burns on it now. He was grinning like someone who had just tasted something exceptional. You can feel that, Naruto said, and he was also grinning, and for a moment the two of them stood in the middle of the ruined temple on the impossible island, and they were just happy. Genuinely, simply happy, the way you were happy when the thing you'd been looking for without knowing you were looking for it finally materialized. You hit like a thunderstorm, Luffy said. You bounce like a nightmare, Naruto said. I need to think differently. He brought his hands up in the cross seal. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The clones appeared. Not 2 or 3. Not 10. 50 clones of Naruto filled the temple in the space between one breath and the next, identical, each one fully solid, each one with their own chakra signature, spread through the temple's interior and outside the perimeter columns, in the black sand and in the gaps between column stumps. Luffy looked around at all of them. He tilted his head back and laughed up at the open sky. Now we're talking, he said. They came from every direction. Naruto's clones didn't attack in sequence. They attacked in overlapping waves, continuous, adaptive, each one trying a slightly different approach because each one was independently processing the fight. Luffy's rubber body handled 7, 8, 9 simultaneous impacts, absorbed, deflected, bounced, and he was moving through them, not standing still, his arms stretching in wide arcs that scattered 3 or 4 clones at a stroke, each clone he hit dispersing in a small explosion of smoke and feeding its combat memory back to the original. The original Naruto wasn't in the pile. He was watching from the top of the remaining column stumps, sitting on it cross-legged, processing the data from his clones with the part of his brain that had spent years learning to aggregate parallel information, watching how Luffy moved, how he prioritized, which angles he naturally defended and which he left open. Luffy figured out where he was in about 45 seconds. He didn't go through the clones. He stretched his arms sideways past all of them, latched onto the column stump, and snapped himself through the air in a straight line directly at the original. Naruto was already gone. He'd seen it coming. The moment Luffy's attention shifted from the clones to him, the quality of focus changed, and Naruto had learned to read that particular quality in opponents because he'd seen it before, in Niji's Byakugan, in Sasuke's Sharingan, in the way perceptive fighters found you through misdirection, and he dropped off the stump and gone low, sliding under Luffy's trajectory. Luffy hit the stump with both feet, used it as a platform, launched himself in a different direction before gravity could claim him, midair pivot, turning a miss into a new attack, the way he always did, the way fighting felt to him, something between dancing and falling, always in motion, always forward. Naruto hit him from below. A kick. Straight up. Chakra reinforced, the force of it far beyond what the leg alone could generate, and it caught Luffy in the chin and stretched his entire body upward in a long rubber arc, his feet still at chest height, his head now 20 feet above the temple floor. Then gravity brought him back down. He hit the mosaic face up and lay there for a second. "Ow," he said to the stars. "You okay?" Naruto said, appearing at the edge of his vision. "Great," Luffy said, and swept his leg out in a low arc that should not have reached Naruto at all, except that the leg stretched, the ankle extending, the sweep becoming a full-circle trip that caught Naruto's feet and dropped him flat. Naruto hit the mosaic. He lay there for a second. The stars looked the same from down here. "Ow," he said. They fought for a long time. It was not the kind of fighting that ended quickly. Not because either of them was holding back, they weren't, demonstrably, conclusively weren't, but because they were each, in their own way, extraordinary, and extraordinary against extraordinary produced not a short, decisive conflict but a sustained, escalating, exploratory one. The kind of fight that told a story. The kind where each exchange added something to the understanding. Naruto tried wind release, Raisin Shuriken, and the shuriken-shaped blade of compacted wind and chakra cut across the temple floor in a horizontal arc at ground level, and Luffy jumped it, not stretched, just jumped, body going straight up like a spring releasing, and came back down with Gomu Gomu no axe, his foot coming down from above with gravity and rubber launch velocity combined. And the impact on the mosaic floor cracked 3 large sections of it, and sent a shockwave outward that flattened the grass for 20 feet in every direction. Naruto created a Rasengan in each hand and came from both sides simultaneously, and Luffy stretched both arms forward to grab him, and they collided in the center. 4-point impact, rubber arms wrapping around both wrists, Rasengans spinning against Luffy's palms, the compressive force dispersed in every direction except through, and they struggled there for a second, both of them straining, genuine effort. The muscles in Naruto's arms defined and hard with chakra-enhanced effort, Luffy's rubber body maintaining contact, redistributing force constantly. Then Luffy headbutted him. Direct, close range, forehead to forehead, and it was partly rubber-enhanced and partly just genuinely very hard, and Naruto's vision went white for about half a second, and Luffy used the half-second to break the clinch and get space. "Did you just headbutt me?" Naruto said. "Yes," Luffy said. "Into a move that needed both my hands to execute." "Yes," Luffy said. "That's..." Naruto touched his forehead. "That's actually really smart." "Thanks," Luffy said, and the simplicity of it, the complete absence of ego in the thanks, made Naruto start laughing in the middle of the fight, which had never happened to him before in actual combat, and which turned out to be fine because Luffy was laughing too. They both caught their breath. The temple was significantly more damaged than it had been. Mosaic sections cracked and displaced. 2 column stumps fully demolished. The black sand of the surrounding area carved and churned where attacks had landed beyond the perimeter. One of the white bark trees at the western edge had been split at the base by a wind-release technique, and lay on its side, still slowly falling in the way of very large things. Neither of them had used anything close to their maximums. They both knew it. It was present in the gap, the held-back quality, not of reluctance, but of mutual unspoken agreement that they were still in the part of this that was about knowing each other, and the part that was about everything they actually had was still coming. Gear second, Luffy said. Naruto looked at him. Luffy's body began to change. Steam rose from his skin, the heat of it visible in the night air, condensing above him in wisps. His skin flushed deep red, his heartbeat audible and rapid, the acceleration of blood through his veins producing a physical warmth that Naruto could feel from 5 feet away. His eyes changed, not in color, but in something behind them, in the quality of the attention in them, sharpened to a point. He looked faster. He was faster, visibly, measurably, the stillness of his waiting having a different quality now, coiled. Naruto watched this and understood it, the transformation principle, the deliberate physiological escalation, and felt his own body respond, not with fear but with the deep cellular recognition of a challenge, the thing inside him that had never learned to back down from anything and never wanted to. "I'm going to use Sage Mode," Naruto said. "What does that do?" Luffy said. "Makes everything better," Naruto said. "Stronger, faster, the sensory range expands, the chakra quality changes." He looked at Luffy. "It also means I can hit you." "Good," Luffy said. Naruto closed his eyes. He was still for 3 full seconds. The natural energy of Miravel, the island's ancient, deep-rooted life force, flowed into him, gathered in him, the toad markings appearing around his eyes, amber irises, dark rings, the signature of Sage Mode. He opened his eyes and the quality of his presence in the space changed. It was like a fire going from banked embers to full. "Ready?" he said. "Yeah," Luffy said. They moved at the same moment. Gear's second Luffy was something different. The standard speed of Luffy's attacks was already significant, but Gear's second removed the reading time, the lag between perceiving an attack and responding to it that every opponent relied on. He was throwing punches before Naruto's eyes had finished tracking his starting position. But Sage Mode Naruto was sensing, not seeing. He didn't need his eyes to tell him where the attack was coming from. He felt it in the natural energy around him, in the displacement of air and earth, and the faint electromagnetic signature of Luffy's moving body, and he was moving to counter it before it arrived. First contact in this form. Luffy's right hook, Naruto's left forearm block. The impact sounded like a thunderclap and the shockwave kicked up a ring of displaced sand and stone. Naruto's forearm hurt. The natural energy amplified everything, including pain, and hitting rubber moving at that speed was like blocking a cannonball. He didn't back up. He drove forward, inside the extension of the punch, and brought his knee up into Luffy's midsection with full Sage-enhanced force. Luffy took it, body absorbing, the impact spreading through rubber, and grabbed Naruto's knee before he could withdraw it, and turned, and threw him. Naruto twisted in the air, landed feet first on the remaining intact section of the temple's far wall, used it as a launch pad, and came back with a Sage Art, massive Rasengan that he'd formed in the 4 seconds of airtime, a technique that used natural energy to amplify the Rasengan beyond its normal ceiling, the sphere of it now nearly the size of Naruto's entire torso, the sound of it less a note than a sustained roar. Luffy pulled his arm back. Far back. His body elongating, the spring tension building. "Goma Goma no Jet Bazooka," he said, very quietly, without the usual announce it to the world energy, which was somehow more alarming. The 2 attacks met in the center of the temple. The resulting explosion was not the kind that produced fire. It produced concussive force, a perfect sphere of compressed energy releasing outward in every direction simultaneously, the mosaic floor beneath it shattering completely, the remaining column stumps going over, the white trees at the edge bending away from the blast as though bowing. The two figures on the mosaic, the old carved figures in their fighter's weight and their non-combat stillness, disappeared under the debris. And the ground shook. Not just the temple floor. The island, Miravel itself, shook, a deep subterranean tremor that had nothing geological about it, and everything experiential, as though the island recognized what was happening on its surface and responded to it the way a bell responds to being struck. On the Thousand Sunny, everyone came awake simultaneously. Nami had the seismographic equipment out before she was fully conscious, the numbers on it making no sense, the magnitude reading spiking and then settling and then spiking again in the pattern of, not an earthquake. She'd been through enough of those. This was something else. Something with intention. That's them, Soros said from the doorway of the cabin. He was fully awake. He might not have slept. Usopp made a sound from inside his hammock. Should we? Chopper started. No, Zoro said. But the ground, no, Zoro said again, and his voice had a quality that ended the conversation, not because it was harsh but because it was absolutely certain. They're fine. This is what it looks like when two people like that actually fight. He leaned in the doorway for a moment, listening to the tremors moving through the Sunny's hull from the water. Let them. He went back inside. After a moment, the others did too. In the tower, Rickavalve stood at his window. He had not moved from the desk in hours, but the tremor brought him upright, and he stood at the amberlit window and looked toward the ruined temple and the glow of disturbed chakra energy in the air above it, the subtle iridescence of Sage Mode and Gear Second interacting in the same space, the energy signature of it unlike anything he'd recorded in either world. His pen was in his hand. He looked for a long time. Then he set the pen down and picked up a different instrument, a measuring device of his own design, calibrated to detect dimensional stability at the intersection node. He held it up. The numbers surprised him. They surprised him enough that he checked them twice, recalibrated, and checked again. The dimensional membrane at the intersection point, the Miravel node, was not destabilizing under the energy output of the fight. It was doing the opposite. The competing energy signatures were resonating at the node's natural frequency, and the resonance was reinforcing the membrane structure, stabilizing it, the way two properly tuned frequencies could strengthen the material they moved through. They were making it stronger. Rickavalve sat back down slowly. He stared at his numbers. That's not... He stopped. He looked at the diagram in his book. The concentric circles, the intersection lines, the calculated variables. That's not what the model predicted. He picked up his pen. He drew a line through an assumption at the bottom of the diagram. He wrote something next to it in his precise, small hand, something he had not considered because it had not appeared in any of the models because it required a variable he hadn't assigned proper weight to. He wrote, "The quality of the will matters as much as its magnitude. Combat between compatible wills produces resonance, not cancellation. A fight they both choose is categorically different from a fight they are forced into." He stared at what he'd written. Outside, the island trembled again, softer this time, the way it trembled when a long note fades to its final resonance. Ricka set down the pen. For the second time that day, his face moved through uncertainty, longer this time, more substantial, the uncertainty of a man who has built a magnificent model and has just found the one fact that doesn't fit it. He didn't like not fitting facts. He had dedicated his life to facts fitting. In the temple, the dust settled. Luffy and Naruto stood in what was now essentially an open-air arena of broken mosaic and overturned stone, both of them marked by the fight. Luffy's vest all but destroyed, both arms raw from high-velocity attacks, a cut above one eyebrow that he hadn't felt until the adrenaline thinned. Naruto's coat was gone entirely, abandoned somewhere in the third or fourth exchange, his forehead protector askew, a bruise forming along his left cheekbone from the head but that had gone slightly wide and caught him at the wrong angle. They were breathing hard. Both of them. Genuinely hard, the kind of breathing that meant they'd been somewhere significant. And they were both still standing. Clearly, solidly, still standing. Luffy found his hat. It had been knocked from where he'd placed it at the beginning and had wound up under a fragment of fallen column, somehow undamaged. He picked it up and put it back on. Naruto looked at the sky. The stars had moved. Hours had passed without either of them noticing the time go. That was Gear 2nd in Sage Mode, Naruto said. Yeah, Luffy said. We haven't. Naruto looked at him. No, Luffy said. Not even close. A long pause. This island shook, Naruto said. I felt it, Luffy said. We're not in a controlled situation, Naruto said. If we go further, the island can take it, Luffy said with a confidence that had no basis in structural engineering or seismological data and was nonetheless completely convincing. If it couldn't, it would have said so. Naruto looked at him. Islands don't, this one does, Luffy said. You felt it when we hit that big one. It wasn't breaking. It was responding. He looked at the cracked mosaic beneath them, at the symbol that Robin had translated, now fractured but still legible, the two halves of it present and clear. Resolve. Like it was designed for this. Naruto looked down at the mosaic too. At the broken symbol. At the space where the two carved figures had been, now buried under debris, but their positions still implied by the empty floor around them. He thought about the temple. About a civilization building this place. About what it meant to build a temple to the moment after two forces met, and neither one was destroyed. Tomorrow, Naruto said. What? We stop for tonight. We go back to the ship, we sleep, we eat. He looked at Luffy. And tomorrow we finish it. Luffy held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Tomorrow, he agreed. With everything, Naruto said. With everything, Luffy confirmed. They stood in the broken temple under the shifted stars, and the word tomorrow between them was not a delay or a retreat. It was the thing a story did before its final chapter. The inhale before the note that mattered. The island was still. Patient. Ancient. Waiting, the way it had been built to wait, for the resolution that its builders had believed, had taken the stone and the time and the tremendous labor of faith to carve their belief into the world, would eventually come. The symbol on the mosaic caught the starlight and gave it back. Two halves. Still legible. Still whole. Chapter 4. The breaking point. Morning on Miravel came in wrong. Not dramatically wrong, no red sky, no strange weather, no obvious sign that the day intended to be different from the one before it. Just a quality to the light that was off by a degree that most people wouldn't notice. The kind of wrongness that lived in the peripheral vision, that vanished when you looked directly at it, and returned the moment you looked away. Nami noticed it. She'd been up before sunrise with her instruments, running the same measurements she'd run the previous morning, and the numbers were different in ways that her training told her mattered, even though her training had no framework for an island that shouldn't exist in the middle of two merging dimensions. The barometric pressure was inconsistent across the island's surface, higher near the tower, lower near the cliff edge, the gradient between them suggesting an atmospheric boundary that had no meteorological cause. The temperature had dropped 4 degrees overnight. Not from weather. The sky was clear. She wrote the numbers down. She looked at them for a long time. Then she went below deck and made coffee because some problems required caffeine before they could be properly engaged with. She was on her second cup when she heard the footsteps on deck. Not Luffy. She knew Luffy's footsteps, the irregular enthusiastic rhythm of them, the way they always seemed to be moving faster than the situation strictly required. These were different. Even measured, the footsteps of someone who had been moving through the world carefully for long enough that careful had become their natural gait. She brought a second cup up. Naruto was standing at the bow, looking at the island, his hands loose at his sides. He changed into a clean version of his outfit, the orange and black, a fresh coat, and he'd retied his forehead protector straight, the leaf symbol centered and precise. He looked, Nami thought, like someone who had made a decision and dressed for it. She handed him the coffee without a word. He looked at it. Then at her. "Thank you," he said, and took it. They stood together at the bow for a while, drinking coffee and looking at Mirabelle in the pre-dawn light, the white trees catching the first gray suggestion of morning, the tower's amber windows still burning steadily. "Does it always burn?" Nami said, meaning the window. "Probably," Naruto said. "He doesn't strike me as someone who sleeps much." "Lonely," Nami said. Not pityingly. Just observationally. Naruto looked at the window. "Yeah," he said. "Probably." A pause. The ocean made its sounds against the hull. "You're going to fight today," Nami said. Still not a question. "Yes." "All the way," she said. "Yes." She looked at the coffee in her hands. "Luffy doesn't lose," she said, and her voice had something in it that was not quite fierceness and not quite fear but was made from the same material as both. "I want to be clear about that. Not because he's invincible. He's been hurt. He's been broken and he's come back but he doesn't lose. Not when it matters. Not when he's decided." "I know," Naruto said. "And you're still going to fight him?" "Yes," Naruto said. Then, carefully, "I don't lose either. When it matters." She looked at him. He looked at her. The coffee steamed between them in the cool morning air. "Okay," she said. She finished her cup. "If either of you destroys this ship, I will find a way to make you pay for it out of your own pockets, across dimensional boundaries if necessary. I am extremely serious about this." Naruto looked at the thousand sunny, the great golden lion figurehead, the mast, the bright and living presence of it. "We won't fight near the ship," he said. "Good," Nami said. She turned to go below. At the hatch she stopped. "Naruto." He looked at her. "Thank you," she said. "For the last 2 days. For being someone worth trusting with him." She went below before he could respond, because Nami understood that some things were better said and not followed up on, and she understood it because she had spent years on a ship with people who were all, in their various catastrophic and magnificent ways, worth trusting. Luffy was already on the island when Naruto got there. He'd gone ahead while Naruto was still drinking his coffee, not impatiently, not in avoidance, just in the way that Luffy moved toward things that mattered, which was immediately and without fanfare. He was standing at the center of the ruined temple, in the middle of the shattered mosaic, looking at nothing in particular with his hands in his pockets. He'd left his hat on the ship. That was how Naruto knew. In 2 days of knowing Monkey D. Luffy, he'd come to understand the hat the way you came to understand the language of a person who expressed things physically rather than verbally. The hat was present when Luffy was being himself, easy, curious, all of it. It was present in conflict, in adventure, in the ordinary hours. He pulled it down when something was private. He put it down when something was being placed in the world with care. He'd left it on the ship. Which meant he made a decision, and was not carrying his most important thing into the space where the decision was going to be executed. It meant, this mattered enough to be separate from everything else. Naruto stood at the temple's edge and understood it completely. He untied his forehead protector. He folded it twice and put it in his pocket. Luffy heard him arrive. He turned around. "No hat," Naruto said. "No headband," Luffy said. They looked at each other in the early morning light of Mirabelle, in the ruin of the temple that had been built for exactly this, on the island that had been put here for exactly this, and neither of them needed to say anything else about what today was. "I'm going to use everything," Naruto said. "Everything I have." "I know," Luffy said. "Me too." He rolled his neck. His shoulders. He took a breath that was slow and deliberate, and when he exhaled it he was different, not visibly, not immediately, but the quality of his presence in the space shifted. The ambient air pressure changed. Something in the island responded to it, a low vibration, felt in the soles of the feet, in the chest cavity, the particular resonance of an emperor's ambition making itself known. Conqueror's Haki. Passive, not directed. Just present. Just true. The remaining white trees at the temple's edge bent away from him slightly, as though leaning back from a wind that wasn't wind. Naruto felt it. He'd felt a version of this from powerful opponents before, Madara, Kagaya, the 6 paths enhanced pressure of something vast and unmovable behind a person's surface. But this was different from all of those. Those had been overwhelming in the way that natural disasters were overwhelming, enormous and indifferent. This had personality. This had warmth in it. This was the gravity of someone who had never in their life needed anything other than themselves. It made Naruto want to match it. Not out of ego. Out of the deep honoring of something that deserved to be matched. Kurama's chakra rose in him, not flooding, not violent, just present, surfacing the way a tide came in, steady and complete. The whisker marks on his cheeks deepened. His eyes went red-orange. The yellow of sage mode followed immediately after, the toad markings framing his eyes, natural energy flowing in from the island around him, drawn up through his feet from Miravel's ancient, deep reserves. The combination, Kurama's power and sage mode together, was not Baryon mode. Not yet. But it was the precursor to it, the foundation, the full architecture of what Naruto was before he started making trades he couldn't take back. The two of them looked at each other through their respective escalations. Then they both smiled. Involuntarily, simultaneously, the way you couldn't help smiling at something that was exactly right. Okay, Luffy said. Yeah, Naruto said. It began differently from the night before. The night before had been exploratory, fast and genuine, but still the version of themselves they showed first. Morning brought what was underneath. Naruto opened with 50 clones and natural energy raisin shuriken, the variant that used sage mode to amplify the wind release beyond its normal ceiling, the shuriken spinning out in a horizontal disc formation that covered the full width of the temple, and then some. The wind edges of it cut through the stone columns they hit and kept going, the kind of technique that didn't stop because of obstacles. Luffy went up. Straight up, both arms extending downward to grab the temple floor and launch himself skyward, body compressing and then releasing with the full stored force of a rubber band pulled to its limit. He went 40 feet into the air above the wind disk and it passed beneath him, carving a clean horizontal section out of every stone's surface it touched at that height, and from 40 feet up Luffy could see the full geometry of the temple and the surrounding black sand and the white trees and the tower at the island's center with its amber window, and in the brief suspended moment at the top of his arc he felt the whole island below him. The ancient weight of it, the sense that it was holding its breath. Then he came down. Gear second came on at the apex. The steam rose immediately, the heat visible even from the ground, and when he hit the remaining section of temple floor it wasn't a landing, it was a detonation. The concussive force of compressed rubber and gear second velocity meeting stone cratered the floor a full foot deep, and the shockwave went outward in every direction. The clones dispersed in the wave. The original Naruto was already airborne. He hadn't waited to see the result. He'd seen the apex, read the descent trajectory, moved to the position where Luffy would land and then 3 feet beyond it, and he came down on Luffy with a chakra-enhanced double-axe strike that hit the back of his guard. Luffy's guard was rubber. It absorbed. Naruto pushed through the absorption with natural energy. The sage amplification meant the attack had a penetrating quality that bypassed some of the dispersion principle, the force going through rather than around. Luffy felt it. His guard gave slightly. He looked at Naruto's hands over his forearms with genuine appreciation. You figured it out, he said. Natural energy, Naruto said. It doesn't care what you're made of. Good, Luffy said. Gear third. He bit his thumb. The air rushing into his arm was audible, a deep pneumatic sound, the limb inflating, growing, the proportions of it shifting from rubber person scale to something else entirely. His right arm became enormous, a size that should have unbalanced him and didn't because his body understood its own physics in ways that transcended the apparent. Goma Goma no giant! He swung. The impact of the giant pistol hit Naruto with enough force to take him off the island. Not metaphorically. Not nearly. The attack lifted him off the ground, carried him backward through the air at the kind of speed that made trees into a blur, and he hit the cliff face at the island's western edge hard enough to crack the stone and drop 30 feet before catching himself, chakra to his feet, dragging against the cliff face, slowing himself, stopping himself, standing sideways on vertical stone 200 feet above the ocean. He stood there for a moment. Spit rock dust out of his mouth. Looked up at the island top above him. "Okay," he said quietly. Not to anyone. Just to the fact of it. He closed his eyes. The natural energy of the island deepened around him. The toad markings intensified. He drew it in, more than before, pushing to the upper edge of what he could maintain, the balance of natural energy, and his own chakra pulled taut and held. In his core, Kurama's massive presence rose to match. He opened his eyes. They were fully amber. Fully present. The combination of Kurama's sage mode was visible as a golden quality to the air immediately around him, the way a candle flame had a warmth sphere even in still air. He walked up the cliff face like it was a road. Luffy met him at the top. Gear second still. The steam rising off him in the morning air mixing with the golden quality around Naruto, the two energy signatures creating something visual that Frankie, watching from the sunny through the longest telescope they had, having woken everyone with an extremely loud announcement that it was starting, could see from the ship and was describing to the rest of the crew in a running narration that combined technical appreciation with mounting alarm. "He's going up the cliff," Frankie said. "Naruto is walking straight up the cliff. The golden, it's the chakra aura, right? The golden thing around him. Luffy is at the top, Luffy hasn't deflated the arm yet, give me that," Nami said, taking the telescope. "He's fine," Zoro said, not looking. "How do you know? You're not even, because he's Luffy," Zoro said, as though this were a complete and sufficient explanation, which for Zoro it was. Nami looked through the telescope. She watched Naruto reach the cliff top. She watched Luffy meet him there. She watched the exchange that followed, too fast to follow in detail, but the overall shape of it clear, two people at the top of their current capacity, pushing each other upward by the simple fact of each other's existence. She lowered the telescope. "They're not fighting like enemies," she said. Sanji, who had made coffee for everyone and was distributing it with the focused care of a person who needed to do something useful, looked at her. "No, they're fighting like..." She thought about it. "Like sparring partners who are also testing something." She frowned at the island. "Like they're both trying to find out something that requires both of them to be completely honest." "That's what a real fight is," Zoro said. He was sitting on the railing, one knee up, arms crossed, eyes closed. Most people don't know it because most fights aren't real. Usopp looked at him. "When did you get philosophical?" "I've always been philosophical," Zoro said. "You're just not usually awake when I am." On the cliff top above the island, Luffy deflated the giant arm. The fight had moved from the temple to the cliff edge, driven there by the momentum of the giant pistol exchange, and the cliff was a different kind of arena, no cover, no walls, no floor below them except the 200-foot drop to the ocean. Wind came off the Grand Line in long clean sweeps, strong enough to notice. Naruto stood 8 feet away from the cliff edge, Luffy 6 feet from the opposite edge, and between them was the width of the island's spine, narrow here at the top, maybe 30 feet across, the land falling sharply on both sides. "I want to ask you something," Naruto said. They were both breathing hard. Genuinely hard now, in the way that meant they'd both been in the upper registers for sustained periods and the toll was accumulating. "Okay," Luffy said. "The Conqueror's Haki," Naruto said. "You use it like it's part of you. Like breathing." "It is," Luffy said. "In my world, the closest thing to it is the Nine Tails chakra. Or the Six Paths power." He looked at his hands. "Both of those came from somewhere outside me. Someone gave them to me, or I took them." He looked at Luffy. "Where does yours come from?" Luffy thought about it. He thought about it genuinely, not performing consideration but actually reaching for something he never needed to articulate. "I don't know," he said. I think it's just what's in me. What's always been in me. He touched his chest. Like it's not something I got. It's something I am. Naruto looked at him for a long moment. I think mine might be the same, he said slowly. I think the Nine Tails and the Sage Power, I think they just showed me what was already there. Unlocked it. He paused. But I've never been sure. Because I grew up being told my power was dangerous. That it came from the monster inside me. That without it I was. He stopped. Luffy was looking at him with steady, uncomplicated attention. Not pity. Not compensation. Just listening. There was a time, Naruto said carefully, when I thought the power and the person were separate things. The fox's chakra was the power. Naruto Uzumaki was the person. And the question was how to use the power without losing the person. He exhaled. Now I think they were always the same. The fox, the sage energy, the Rasengan, the clones, all of it was just me. Just different ways of being more of what I already was. Luffy smiled. It was a specific smile, not the wide one he used for excitement and discovery, but the smaller one, the one that appeared when something confirmed something he'd already felt to be true. Yeah, he said. That's what it is. They looked at each other. The wind moved between them. Then they both moved. This was the part of the fight that Frankie would struggle to describe coherently for weeks afterward. Not from lack of observation, he had the best eyes on the crew and had been watching the whole time, but because what happened on the cliff top was operating at a register that linear description handled poorly. Gear 4th. Luffy's body transformed. The muscle inflation, the tattoo-like markings, the skin that was no longer purely his skin but a manifested layer of armament, his body made of hardened rubber and ambition and something that was probably not a physical substance but was present and visible nonetheless. He didn't grow dramatically in size, Bound Man, not Tank Man, but the space he occupied felt different, larger in ways unrelated to physical dimension. He stood at the cliff's edge and the Conqueror's haki was no longer ambient. It was directed. It hit the air between them like a physical object, and the cliff-top grass flattened completely, and the wind coming off the ocean pushed back the way wind pushed back from a wall. Naruto took the full weight of it without moving. Not because it didn't reach him. It reached him completely, the full presence of Luffy's will landing on him the way a wave landed, enormous, unavoidable. But Naruto had stood inside the killing intent of the Nine Tails when he was 12 years old, and he had stood in the presence of the 10 Tails, and he had been at the center of a war that decided the fate of the world, and the part of him that responded to enormous pressure was not the part that ran. It was the part that lit up. His chakra answered. The golden quality of the Kurama-Sage combination expanded, pushing back against the Conqueror's pressure, the two forces meeting in the narrow air between them, and doing what they'd done in the temple the previous night, not canceling. Resonating. The cliff top hummed. The island hummed. Rickavalve, in his tower, knocked his measuring instrument off his desk reaching for it, picked it up, read the numbers, set it down, picked it up again. Luffy launched. Gear 4th was faster than Gear 2nd in a different way, not purely velocity but something more like inevitability, a quality of motion that suggested that the destination was already determined and the travel between here and there was just the formality of covering the distance. He closed the 30 feet between them in something below a second. Naruto went into tailed beast mode. Not Baryon mode. Not yet. The full Nine Tails manifestation, the golden chakra shroud taking the form of the fox around him, enormous and present, Kurama's face overlaying his own, the combined being of Naruto Uzumaki and the nine-tailed fox manifested and unified, the cloak adding meters to his effective reach and a magnitude to every movement that changed the physics of the encounter. Luffy's King Kong gun, both fists together, Gear 4th momentum behind them, armament layered over rubber layered over conquerors, hit the chakra shroud with a sound that reached the thousand sunny clearly enough that Brook stopped playing mid-note, and everyone on deck turned toward the island simultaneously. The resulting explosion was not small. The cliff top took the full shockwave. Stone fractured along the cliff's edge, a 20-foot section of it shearing off and falling to the ocean below. The black sand at the base of the cliff jumped 6 inches off the surface and came back down. In the forest, the white trees moved collectively away from the blast the way a crowd moves away from something that happens suddenly in its center. And the island shook. Not the resonant bell tremor of the previous night. A genuine, structural shaking, the deep geological response of a landmass to more energy than it had been designed to absorb in a single moment, and the sound of it was something felt in the chest rather than heard by the ears. Luffy and Naruto were both on their feet. Both, just barely. The exchange had moved them both back to their respective cliff edges, the distance between them restored, both of them reading the aftermath. Luffy's Gear 4th was drawing down. The time limit of it was not a secret. He'd been in Gear 4th long enough now that the physical cost was becoming a visible thing, the steam quality changing, the skin flushing deeper. He had minutes. Naruto's chakra shroud was holding. But Kurama's Sage Mode together was expensive. The Ninetales manifestation at this scale for this duration was pulling hard on the reserves. He had more time than Luffy's Gear 4th but not unlimited time. They both knew the math. And then the island shook again. Different this time. Not a response to them. Something else, something from beneath, from Miravel's deep structure, a sound that had been building since the resonance started and had finally reached a threshold. A crack appeared. In the ground between them, running from one side of the cliff spine to the other, not a small crack, a fault, 2 feet wide, 3 feet, opening as they watched, the stone on both sides of it shifting relative to each other in ways that suggested the cliff top was not going to be a cliff top much longer. Then, from behind Luffy, another sound. From the tower. The amber window went dark. Just for a moment. Then it came back, brighter, different, not the warm oil lamp quality but something colder and more urgent. A light that was the color of the sky fractures. The dimensional color. And Rikuveil's voice, carrying somehow across the distance between the tower and the cliff, not magically amplified, not supernaturally projected, just carried by the still air of Miravel with the precision of a man who knew how to make his voice travel when it needed to, reached both of them at the same moment. "Stop," he said. Not commanding. Not requesting. He said it the way you said it when you were watching something go wrong that you understood and no one else yet did. They stopped. Not because they were told. They stopped because the quality of the voice was the quality of someone who had just found the fact that didn't fit the model, and the model, as it turned out, was holding something everyone needed to know about. The crack in the cliff top held its width. Stopped widening. Luffy let Gear 4th down. The steam dissipated. He was back to normal proportion, looking slightly paler than usual, the Gear 4th expenditure showing in the set of his shoulders. Naruto's chakra shroud settled back to a minimal glow, the Kurama manifestation withdrawing. He looked, suddenly, like himself, the 17-year-old with whisker marks and blonde hair and the particular quality of exhaustion that came not from weakness but from having pushed something significant. They both looked at the tower. The amber light had returned to its normal quality. But at the base of the tower, which they could see from the cliff top at this distance, a door had opened. A door that hadn't been visible before, at ground level, and through it came Rikuveil, walking across the courtyard with the driven, purposeful stride of someone who had been sitting for too long and had a great deal to say. "He's coming here," Naruto said. "Yeah," Luffy said. They looked at each other. The fight, its momentum, its escalation, the place it had been heading, was suspended between them like a breath held. Not ended. Not abandoned. Just paused, for the thing that was coming. "We're not done," Luffy said. "No," Naruto said. "But we should hear him." "Yes," Naruto said. Then, quieter. "Because something's wrong. I can sense it. The island is..." He looked at the crack in the cliff top. "It's not angry. It's not panicking. It's trying to tell us something." Luffy looked at the crack too. At the fault line running between them where they'd been standing, where the fight had been building toward its peak. He crouched down and put his palm flat on the stone beside it. The island trembled very slightly under his hand. Not in distress. In urgency. The difference between a scream and a tapped shoulder. He stood up. "Let's go," he said. They came down from the cliff top together. Rika Vale was waiting in the courtyard. He had the measuring instrument in his hand and his notebook under his arm, and his expression had lost the scholarly patience entirely, and was now something rawer. Not fear, not quite, but the thing adjacent to fear that came from understanding systems and watching one behave in ways the model didn't account for. He looked at Luffy first. Then Naruto. Then at the cliff top visible above the tree-line, where the fault crack had stabilized. "The node is reversing," he said. No preamble. No sequential introduction. He decided, apparently, that sequencing was a luxury for situations that had more time than this one did. "The dimensional membrane at the intersection point, Mirabelle, is beginning to collapse. You said it would stabilize if one of us yielded," Naruto said. "That's what the model predicted," Rika said. "And?" Luffy said. "The model was wrong," Rika said, and the words cost him something visible. This was not a man accustomed to his models being wrong. "What you've been doing, fighting, genuinely, both of you completely, it's not destabilizing the node. The resonance between your energy signatures has been reinforcing it. The membrane has been strengthening." He opened his notebook to the page with the revised calculation. "But the fight has also been drawing on the island's structural reserves, Miravel's own geological integrity, and that is not an unlimited resource. The island is going to break," Luffy said. "If you continue to the conclusion at the intensity you were approaching, yes. The cliff-top fault indicates that the structural reserves are approaching critical depletion. If Miravel's physical integrity fails—" He stopped. "The node fails with it," Robin said. Everyone turned. The crew was at the courtyard edge. They'd come from the ship, drawn by the tremors, and Robin was in front of them with her second book still under her arm and an expression of focused, dangerous intelligence. "The island is the node," she continued, walking into the courtyard. "Its physical existence is what holds the intersection point stable. If it breaks apart, both dimensional planes lose their anchor point and resume uncontrolled merging," Rika said. "Yes." He looked at Robin with the specific expression he'd had when she'd identified the anchor variable the previous day. The expression of someone encountering a peer. "Yes, exactly." Silence in the courtyard. The fountain's carved figure with its raised arms and its joyful face stood at the center of it. Nami had both hands pressed over her mouth. Not in panic, in the particular horror of someone for whom numbers and consequences were not abstract, for whom the math of a situation was always viscerally real. Two worlds. Both unraveling. "So we can't finish the fight," Naruto said slowly. "Not at that intensity. Not on the island," Rika said. "And the temporal window is closing. The merging process has been accelerating since the resonance began. We have—" He checked his instrument. "Perhaps 12 hours before the membrane instability becomes irreversible regardless of what happens on the island." "You said one of us needed to yield," Luffy said. He was looking at Rika with a very particular expression, not angry, not afraid, but the look he wore when he was identifying the exact shape of a problem. "You said that resolves it." "That's what I believed," Rika said. "But the resonance is reinforcing it," Luffy said. "The fighting. Both of us, going all the way." "Yes," Rika said. "Which I did not predict." Which means your solution and the actual solution are different," Naruto said. He was watching Luffy with an expression of shared process, both of them arriving at the same place from different directions. "You needed one of us. You thought one anchor was the answer." "Yes," Rika said. "But it's the resonance that's doing it," Luffy said. "Not the winner. The two of us together." Rika looked at them. His scholar's face was doing something it had not done in any of their previous interactions. It was genuinely uncertain. Not performing uncertainty. Experiencing it. "I believe you may be correct," he said, which was clearly an extremely difficult sentence for him to produce. Then we don't need one of us to yield, Naruto said. No, Rika said. But you do need to generate the resonance at its full amplitude, at the level that reinforces the node completely. He looked at the cliff top. And the island cannot sustain, not on the island, Luffy said. Rika looked at him. The island is the node, Luffy said. We fight near the node, the island takes the cost. But if the resonance is what the node needs, he looked at Naruto. What if we're the node? A beat. What if we don't need the island to be in between us? He continued. What if the resonance between the two of us is the thing itself? If we take it off the island, the ocean, Naruto said. His eyes widened very slightly. We fight on the ocean. Away from the island. The membrane at the node would still resonate, Robin said slowly, working through it. She looked at Riku. If the resonance is generated by the energy interaction between them, it propagates through the dimensional membrane regardless of physical location relative to the node. Like a signal. The node doesn't need to be where the signal originates. It needs to receive the signal. Riku was writing fast, his pen moving across the open page of his notebook, numbers and lines and the particular feverish movement of a person recalculating from a new foundation. He wrote for 30 seconds. He stopped. He stared at what he'd written. This could work, he said. The words came out almost against his will, the tone of a man who has spent months being certain of his methodology, and is now holding an answer that his methodology didn't generate. This could, yes. If the resonance amplitude is sufficient. If both of you. He looked up. If both of you genuinely go to your limits. Without the island absorbing it. The membrane receives the full resonance. The node stabilizes completely. How do we know when it's done? Naruto said. Rika held up the measuring instrument. I'll monitor from here. The readings will show stabilization. When it's complete. He paused. You'll feel it. I believe you'll feel it. Luffy looked at Naruto. Naruto looked at Luffy. On the ship, Zoro had been listening to all of this with his arms crossed and his eyes open for once, and he turned to Sanji and said, very quietly, They're going to do something spectacular. And Sanji said, Obviously. And they both looked at the two captains in the courtyard with expressions that were different from each other in every way except that they were both, at their foundation, the same thing. Pride. The ocean, Luffy said. The ocean, Naruto agreed. Luffy turned to his crew. The turn was easy, complete, not checking for permission, not looking for support, just including them in the knowledge of what was about to happen because they were his and he didn't do things without them knowing, even the things they couldn't follow him into. We're going to finish it, he said. On the water. Stay on the ship? Luffy, Nami said. Nami, he said, with all of the certainty in the world in his voice, every gram of it, the full weight of who he was behind her name. She exhaled. She nodded. He looked at Naruto. Naruto looked at him. No limits, Luffy said. No limits, Naruto said. They walked to the shore together, through the courtyard with the fountain and the joyful carved figure, down the old road through the white trees with their carved symbols and their silver leaves, across the black sand and into the water. Behind them, Rikuvale looked at his instrument. The numbers were already moving, both of them wading out into the Grand Line Ocean, the energy signatures of them clear and distinct and already beginning, just from proximity and intent, to resonate. He watched the numbers. He thought about his world, the third world, the one that was gone. The one he hadn't been able to save. He thought about the people in it, and the decision they hadn't been given a chance to make, and the resolution that had come too late and in the wrong form. He thought about two carved figures in a temple on an island he'd assembled from the ruins of everything he'd lost. He thought about the symbol between them. He picked up his pen. He wrote, at the bottom of the recalculated page, in the smallest and most careful letters he'd written in a very long time, I was wrong about what the anchor needed to be. The anchor is not the strongest will. The anchor is the meeting of two wills that recognize each other. Outside, on the water, two figures walked out until the island was behind them and the open ocean was in every direction, and the morning sky above the Grand Line was clear and perfect, and waiting. The island held its breath. The measuring instrument's numbers climbed. Chapter 5. What kings do the Grand Line ocean at full morning was not the ocean of postcards or sailors' songs. It was vast in the specific way that made vastness feel personal, not the impersonal enormity of space or sky, but the close, breathing immensity of something alive, something that had been here before every ship that had ever sailed it, and would be here after the last one sank. The water moved in long, low swells, neither violent nor still, the surface catching the morning light and throwing it back in moving shapes, and the smell of it was clean and deep and old in a way that reached something in the body below the level of thought. Luffy walked on it. Not the way Naruto walked on it, not with chakra to the soles, not with any technique at all. He walked on it the way he walked everywhere else, because Gear 5th changed what the world was rather than what he was in relation to the world, and in Gear 5th the distinction between water's surface and solid ground was approximately as meaningful as the distinction between a drawing and a door. He hadn't gone there yet. He was walking out into the open water in his normal state, the thousand sunny at anchor behind him growing smaller, and beside him Naruto moved across the surface with the easy familiarity of long practice, his chakra doing what it did, the water firm and flat beneath his feet. They walked in silence for a while. The island shrank behind them. After 5 minutes it was a shape. After 10 it was the idea of a shape. The tower was still visible, the dark spire, the amber window, but small enough now that the amber light was just a point, a star at the wrong altitude. Luffy stopped. Not because they'd reached a specific place. There was no specific place in the open ocean. He stopped because this felt right, the distance from everything, the absence of the island's geological stake in what was about to happen, the clean separation of here from there. He looked at the water around him. At the sky. At the horizon in every direction, equidistant, the Grand Line ocean in its morning state, no other ships visible, no other land. Then he looked at Naruto. Naruto was already looking at him. He'd stopped when Luffy stopped, the way you stopped when the person walking beside you stopped, the rhythm of shared movement broken cleanly. Here? Naruto said. Here, Luffy said. Naruto looked at the water. He looked at the sky. He exhaled once, very slowly, and when he finished exhaling he was doing the thing he'd been building towards since the cliff top, not a technique, not a mode, but the settled, inhabited quality of someone who has stopped managing themselves and started simply being what they are. The whisker marks deepened. The eyes shifted. Golden light moved in him the way tide moved, from deep to surface, unhurried and complete. I need to tell you something, he said. Before we start. Luffy waited. Baryon mode, Naruto said. The thing I haven't used yet. What I can still go to. He looked at his hands. It uses my life force. Mine and Kurama's together. Every second I maintain it, we're both burning something we can't get back. He looked at Luffy. I want you to know that before I use it. Because once I go there, you're not stopping. Luffy said. I'm not stopping, Naruto confirmed. And I'm going there. I'm not, I won't hold it back for my sake. I just wanted you to understand what it means. Luffy looked at him for a moment. The water moved beneath them. The morning light was fully present now, high and clean, the gold of it genuine rather than atmospheric. I know what it costs, Luffy said. Not I'm sorry and not don't do it, and not the reassurance that would have been easier and meant less. Just I know. I see what you're offering. I understand the weight of it. Naruto held his gaze for a second. Then he nodded. Once. The specific nod of a decision fully made and not requiring further processing. And Gear 5th. Naruto said. You haven't used it. No, Luffy said. Is it? Naruto considered how to ask. Is it like the other gears? Same principle, different magnitude? Luffy thought about how to explain Gear 5th. It was not something he'd ever tried to explain, because the people who needed to be explained to generally met it at a disadvantage, and the people who didn't need it explained had usually either run away or been knocked out by the time it arrived. He turned the question over. "It's like," he said slowly, "when you're a kid, and you make up rules for a game, but then the other kid says, 'What if there were no rules?'" He looked at the water. "It's that." Naruto stared at him. "That is the least technical description of a power I have ever heard." "I know," Luffy said serenely. "And somehow I completely understand what you mean," Naruto said. "I know," Luffy said again. Naruto laughed. That same full, real laugh from the cliff, the one that happened to him rather than from him. It went out over the water and the water took it without comment, the grand line being, as always, entirely unbothered by human emotion no matter how genuine. "Okay," Naruto said. He straightened. His hands came up in the cross seal, not for clones, not for any specific technique, just the gesture that was his body's way of gathering itself, the physical comma before a significant sentence. "Luffy." "Yeah," Luffy said. "Don't you dare hold back." Luffy grinned. Full width. The grin that predated every good thing that had ever happened to anyone around him. "Same to you," he said. Naruto went to Baryon mode the way you went to a decision you've been ready for, and have been waiting to stop waiting for. There was no dramatic build-up. No expanding energy that built and built until it crested. One moment he was Kurama Sage mode, golden and vast and already extraordinary, and the next moment something shifted at a level below technique, below training, below even will in the ordinary sense of the word. Baryon mode was what happened when two separate beings stopped being separate. When the partnership became so complete that it stopped being a partnership and became a single thing, burning brighter for the joining, spending itself with the particular extravagance of something that understands its own temporary nature, and has decided that temporary can be enough. The golden light became something else. Denser, more complex, a quality of energy that was genuinely difficult to look at directly, not blinding, not intense in the conventional sense, but occupying a register of realness that made everything around it look slightly less real by comparison. The water around Naruto's feet began to evaporate. Not boil, evaporate, the heat of the baryon mode sufficient to convert it directly, a slowly expanding ring of dry air around him on the ocean surface, the water retreating from the phenomenon of him. He looked up. His eyes in baryon mode were different. Not red, not amber. A color that didn't have an established name, somewhere between the orange of a fire's hottest point and the particular quality of sunlight seen through closed eyelids, entirely his own, the signature of the complete union of Naruto Uzumaki and the nine-tailed fox, two wills that had fought each other for years and had found, at the end of the fighting, that they were the same person wearing different faces. "Your turn," he said. Luffy had been watching this transformation with a quality of attention that was not passive. He'd been feeling it, the way the conqueror's haki felt everything significant, the resonance of baryon mode landing on his awareness like a chord struck in a large room, still vibrating when the initial sound was done. He felt himself respond. Not strategically. Not because the situation required it. His body responded to baryon mode the way a fire responded to wind, not extinguished, expanded. He laughed. It started in his chest and came out without decision, the sound of genuine, uncomplicated delight. He laughed at the open sky and the ocean and the golden impossible thing Naruto had become, and the laughter had a quality to it that was distinct from his ordinary laughter, warmer and stranger, as though it were coming from somewhere further down than his lungs. The transformation of Gear 5th was not like the other gears. It did not announce itself with steam or inflation or the sound of air rushing in. It arrived with the sound of a drumbeat, one beat, singular, resonant, felt in the water beneath them and in the air around them and in the structural fabric of the space they occupied. A heartbeat of something vast, amused, and entirely unconcerned with the conventional limits of what was possible. Luffy's hair went white. His clothes went white. The tattoo-like markings that appeared in Gear 4th came, but differently, the lines of them moving now, not fixed, shifting like something alive drawn on a surface that was also alive. His eyes went white, ringed with red that was not the red of blood or fire but the red of cartoons and stories and the oldest, most fundamental human impulse to draw a circle and put a face in it and make it mean something. He was taller. He was the same height. The space he occupied had expanded without his physical dimensions changing, the way a voice could fill a room without the speaker moving. He smiled. The smile was enormous. Not wide, not performed, enormous in the way that a sunrise was enormous, taking up more than the physical space it occupied, the entirety of Luffy's Gear 5th expression being the expression of something that had never been told it wasn't allowed. The Conqueror's haki was not ambient anymore. It was not directed. It was simply present, the way gravity was present, not moving toward anything, just being a fundamental property of the space around him, the ocean's surface dipping slightly in all directions away from where he stood, the water itself acknowledging something. The measuring instrument in Rickavel's hand, on the island a mile behind them, spiked so far beyond its calibrated range that he couldn't read the number. He shook it. He checked the calibration. He set it down and picked up his pen instead because the instrument was no longer the right tool for this. The resonance was not a number anymore. It was a fact. They came together at the center of the open water with a sound that the Straw Hat crew, watching from the Sunny's deck, would each describe differently when asked about it later. Frankie said it was like a cannon shot heard from inside the cannon. Brooke said it was like every note of a symphony arriving simultaneously. Chopper said it was like a thunderclap but warm. Zoro said nothing. He'd felt it in his teeth and his chest and the calluses on his sword hand, and some things lost something in description. Nami's instruments gave her a number that she wrote down and looked at for a long time and then underlined 3 times, not because underlining made it more real but because she needed to do something with her hands. Usopp watched through the telescope and said, very quietly, so that only Sanji heard him, "I can't tell which one is which." And Sanji looked through after him and said, "That's the point," in a tone that wasn't unkind. Gear 5th Luffy fought differently from Gear 4th. Gear 4th was a warrior's mode, the escalation of combat principles, the maximization of rubber's properties within the framework of conventional conflict. It was extraordinary, but it followed rules. Speed, impact, trajectory. The rules were exceptional, but they were rules. Gear 5th didn't follow rules. Gear 5th operated on the principle that rules were a kind of agreement, and the agreement required 2 parties, and if one party stopped agreeing then the rules became merely the other party's expectations, which were at that point entirely their problem. Luffy grabbed the ocean with both hands, reaching into the water around him, and he pulled, and a section of the Grand Line Ocean came up, a column of water 20 feet across and 30 feet tall, rising at his direction, and he threw it at Naruto the way you threw a ball, the entire mass of it moving through the air at the speed of his throw. Naruto cut through it. Baryon mode Naruto moving through a thrown section of ocean produced a column of steam and displaced water and a forward momentum that didn't slow, the heat of Baryon mode converting the water it touched, Naruto emerging from the far side of the column in a line of white vapor, already close, already swinging. The Baryon mode enhanced punch hit Luffy in the chest. In Gear 5th, it hit differently than anything else had hit. Not because it didn't reach him, it reached him completely, the life force quality of Baryon mode's energy bypassing the dispersion properties of rubber the way Sage amplified natural energy had in the temple, and the impact registered, genuinely registered, the full weight of it. But Gear 5th Luffy took it, and the rubber gave and came back and the return gave the punch back, amplified. The reflection principle of his body turned up to a magnitude that sent Naruto backward across the water. Surface trailing steam. Naruto caught himself. Dragged his feet across the surface. Stopped. He looked at his fist. The hand that had landed the punch felt like it had hit something immovable and very, very old. Not pain exactly. A resistance that had no ceiling. "You bounced it back," he said. "Yeah," Luffy said from his cloud of dissipating rubber impact. "Everything comes back." "Everything," Naruto said, and there was something in the way he said it, not the combat assessment, not the tactical notation, but the way the word meant more than its literal content in this context, from this person, in this fight. Naruto brought his hands together. The natural energy of the ocean around them, the life force of the Grand Line itself, enormous and deep and ancient, came up into him through his feet, through the water he stood on, through the baryon mode's expanded intake capacity. He pulled it all in, the way a drain pulled water, and shaped it, and the hand-seal sequence he made was complex, both hands moving through forms with the speed and economy of someone who had made these motions 10,000 times. Sage art, ultra big ball raisin shuriken, he said. Quietly. Not announcing. Just naming. The technique formed above both his hands, not one, two, spiraling around each other, the wind-release blades of each one extending and intersecting, the whole structure the size of a small building, rotating at a speed that was audible as a sustained roar, the air distortion around it bending the ocean surface beneath in a ring of compressed air and churned water. And he threw them both. Luffy stretched. Both arms went out behind him, reaching back to distances that bore no proportional relationship to the length of his body, the full extension of Gear 5th rubber physics, and when he snapped forward the Gomu Gomu no Thor elephant gun was not a punch. It was a conclusion. Both fists together, the full draw of Gear 5th behind them, armament and conquerors and the fundamental rubber physics of a man made of freedom and will, compressed into a single point at the moment of impact. The two ultra-big ball raisin shurikens and the Thor elephant gun met in the center. The sound was not like the cliff-top exchange. The cliff-top had been two forces meeting and pushing against each other. This was two forces meeting and deciding, together, to become something else. The energy didn't cancel and didn't compound in the linear sense, it transformed, the way two musical notes could combine into a third note that was different from either, a chord instead of competition. The resonance bloomed. Outward. In every direction simultaneously. Not as a shockwave, as a pulse, a single wave of something that was not sound and not light and not force but was the quality of two wills recognizing each other completely, propagating through the dimensional membrane at the speed of truth. On Miravel, every stone lantern on the old road lit simultaneously. Not with flame. With a light the color of the sky fractures, cold and clean and dimensional, and the light moved up the road toward the tower, lantern by lantern, in a line, reaching the courtyard and the fountain and the tower entrance, and climbing the spiral tower's outside surface in a slow and certain wave. In the tower, Rick Vale's measuring instrument stopped spiking and settled. To a single, stable, perfect number. He looked at it. He had been in his field for 30 years. He had seen dimensional membranes in 3 different worlds, had measured them and mapped them and watched one fail completely and 2 others come close. He had calibrated his instruments against the most significant energy events he'd been able to document across 3 realities. The number on his instrument was larger than anything he'd previously recorded. And it was holding. Not peaking and declining. Holding, steady and complete, the node's resonance fully established, the membrane between 2 worlds stabilized around the fixed point of 2 people in the open ocean, burning at their limits, not for any reason the model had predicted, but for each other. He sat down. He hadn't realized he'd been standing. He wrote the number in his notebook, and then sat looking at it for a moment before writing, beneath it, in letters that were slightly larger than his usual precise small hand, the anchor held. On the water, the pulse faded. The resonance didn't end, it settled, the way a struck bell settled from its peak vibration into a sustained hum that you felt more than heard. The dimensional membrane was stable. The work was done. Luffy and Naruto stood 50 feet apart on the Grand Line Ocean in the aftermath of it. Both of them were breathing. That was the first thing. Both of them were still standing, still present, the work of the fight and the cost of the final techniques visible in the way they held themselves. Luffy with his Gear 5th unwinding, the white hair going back to black, the strange markings fading, the warmth of it withdrawing like a tide. Naruto with baryon mode releasing its hold, the cost of it in the sudden gravity of his stance, heavier without the life force burning, present in himself in the specific way of someone who has spent something real and knows it. They looked at each other across the water. Both still breathing. Both smiling. Small, not wide, the smile of people who had just been to a place very few people ever went and had found, somewhat to both their relief and amazement, that the other person had been there too. Naruto sat down on the water surface. Just sat cross-legged, like he was in a field, because his legs had made a suggestion, and it was a sensible suggestion. The chakra in his feet maintained the surface tension automatically, habit overriding exhaustion just enough to keep him from sinking. Luffy stretched out flat on the water beside him. Face up. Arms spread. The sea held him on his back, rubber keeping him at the surface in the same way a life preserver might, effortlessly, as though the ocean had agreed to this arrangement long ago. He looked at the sky. We tied, he said. We tied, Naruto agreed from above him. I've never tied before, Luffy said. Neither have I, Naruto said. A pause. The water moved under them slowly, the long low swells of the open Grand Line. I don't hate it, Luffy said. Naruto looked down at him from the cross-legged position. No, he said. Me either. Another pause. Baryon mode, Luffy said. Yeah, Naruto said. Are you? I'm okay, Naruto said. He looked at his hands. The baryon mode cost was subtle and not subtle simultaneously, a depletion that wasn't injury, that didn't hurt in any location that could be pointed to, but that was present in the way that running a very long distance was present in the body long after stopping. He'd used it for less time than he had in the war. He'd be okay. He was choosing to be okay with what it cost. I knew what it was going to take. I chose it anyway. I know, Luffy said. It was worth it, Naruto said. Luffy was quiet for a moment. Then, yeah. He looked at the sky. Yeah, it was. The Thousand Sunny was already under sail toward them before they'd fully registered that the fight was over. Sanji had the ship moving within 3 minutes of the resonance pulse, not because anyone gave an order but because the crew knew, in the wordless collective way they'd developed over years of following the same captain through the same impossible situations, that the thing was done, and their people were in the water, and it was time to go collect them. Luffy was hauled aboard first, still flat, carried up by both arms by Frankie and Zoro with the affectionate indignity of a man who had just expended a substantial amount of his fundamental life force making 2 dimensions stay intact, and was currently floating on the ocean like a sunning sea turtle. Chopper was on him immediately. Medical check, professional, thorough, Chopper in doctor mode being an entirely different creature from Chopper in any other mode, efficient and focused and absolutely unwilling to be charmed out of doing his job properly, which Luffy knew better than to attempt at this particular moment. Vitals are fine, Chopper announced, to no one specifically and everyone generally. Heart rate elevated but stabilizing. No structural damage, the gear 5th post-expenditure reads normal. He pressed a small hoof against Luffy's forearm. You're going to sleep for about 10 hours when this adrenaline clears. After food, Luffy said. After food, Chopper conceded, because arguing this point had never worked. Naruto came aboard under his own power, catching the rope Usopp through and climbing without difficulty, though he sat down on the deck immediately after clearing the railing and stayed sitting. Chopper moved to him next. Naruto submitted to the examination with the patience of someone who had been checked over by medics after battles often enough that the routine was familiar, and the fighting it was pointless. I'm not entirely sure how to read your chakra pathways, Chopper admitted, his instruments applied carefully. But your life force signature is. He paused. Strong. Very strong. Whatever you spent, you still have a lot left. Good to know, Naruto said. Baryon mode is expensive, Naruto said. But not the end. I'll be okay. Chopper looked at him for a long moment with the large brown eyes that held more medical intelligence than most hospitals. You will be, he said finally. Not as reassurance. As a clinical finding. Drink water. Eat something. Working on it, Sanji said, appearing from below deck with a tray before the sentence was finished. Naruto looked at the tray. Then at Sanji. You made this while we were still fighting. I made this before you were finished fighting, Sanji said, with the complete lack of modesty of a man who was simply stating a fact about his own competence. High calorie. Protein heavy. You've both burned something significant. He said it between Luffy and Naruto and withdrew with his cigarette and his dignity. Naruto looked at the food. He looked at the crew around him, Usopp making extremely proud noises about something he'd apparently correctly predicted, Frankie with his arms crossed in the way that meant he was moved and had chosen expressing it structurally, Brooke performing a small ceremonial musical flourish, Robin back to her book but with the particular smile she wore when things had resolved into something she found genuinely satisfying. Zoro at the railing, looking at the island, his back to everyone. And Luffy, on the deck between Naruto and the food, already eating, looking up at Naruto with the expectant expression of someone waiting for a person to realize they're allowed to sit down now. Naruto ate. They went back to the island. Not immediately. The crew needed an hour. The ship needed to be brought around properly. Nami needed to chart the approach with fresh data because her instruments had behaved erratically for the last 30 minutes of the fight, and she didn't trust their current readings of the shallows. But they went back, and the island met them differently than it had the day before. The stone lanterns on the old road were still lit. The cold dimensional light in them had not faded with the resonance. It had settled, the way the resonance itself had settled, into a maintained hum. The black sand of the shore was unmarked by the night's damage. The trees were upright. Even the fault crack on the cliff top, visible from the ship's deck, had closed, not healed exactly, but closed. The two sides of it resettled against each other as though the ground had changed its mind about separating. The island had resolved. The courtyard fountain, when they reached it, had water in it. Not from any visible source. The basin was simply full, the carved figure with its raised arms and its joyful face presiding over water that moved very slightly, gently, as though the fountain remembered what it was supposed to do and had returned to doing it. Robin stood at its edge and looked at the water for a long moment. Then she crouched and touched it and looked at her fingertips. "It's warm," she said. Nobody said anything. Some moments required the particular respect of being allowed to simply be what they were. Riku Vale was waiting at the tower entrance. He looked different from the previous meeting. Not physically, same scholar's face, same ink-stained cuffs, same silver hair. But the held quality he'd had in every previous interaction was gone. He was not a man managing uncertainty anymore. He was something more difficult and more honest, a man holding a revision. He had his notebook under his arm. He had a second notebook as well, smaller, older, the cover worn to a matte finish that spoke of decades of handling. He held this one with a different quality, more carefully. Luffy stopped in front of him. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Riku said, "I owe you both an apology." Luffy tilted his head. Naruto, beside him, waited. "I came to both your worlds prepared to choose one of you," Riku said. "The mechanics of my plan required a singular answer, one anchor, one will, one resolution. I believe this because my previous failure." He stopped. His face moved through something he had been keeping behind his scholar's control for what was clearly a long time. "My world failed because no one was strong enough. I measured strength. I quantified it. I built models that could identify it and rank it and select it." He looked at the notebook in his hand. "And I was wrong about what the relevant variable was. I was measuring strength when I should have been measuring connection." He offered the older notebook. Not to Luffy specifically. To both of them. The gesture including both. "This is everything I recorded about both your worlds," he said. "The dimensional research. The merging mechanics. The resonance data." A pause. "And the history of my world. The one that didn't survive." His voice was very steady. "I would like you to have it. Not as intelligence, as a record. Someone should have it. Someone should know it existed." Luffy looked at the notebook. He looked at Riku. "What happened to your world?" he said. Riku looked back at him with the gray-green eyes that shifted in the light. Two forces that should have resonated were forced to oppose each other. he said. By a scholar, very much like me, who believed he was solving the problem with the correct methodology. He was quiet for a moment. He was me. From 50 years ago. A version of me who had not yet learned what I learned today, watching the two of you. He looked at the notebook in the extended hand. My world died because of a mistake I made before I understood I was making it. And I have spent 30 years attempting to prevent the same mistake in the next worlds I found. But you almost made the same mistake, Naruto said. Not harshly. Factually. Yes, Rika said. Because the knowledge of a mistake doesn't prevent its repetition. Only the willingness to revise does. He held the notebook out more deliberately. Please. Luffy took it. He held it for a moment, looking at the worn cover, the decades of handling in the matte finish of it. Then he passed it to Robin, because Robin was the person on his ship who understood what a record was for and would know how to carry it properly. Robin took it with both hands. She looked at it for a moment. I'll read it, she said to Riku. All of it. Riku looked at her. Something moved through his face, not relief, but the neighbor of relief. The feeling of a burden recognized rather than lifted. Thank you, he said. Then he looked at Luffy and Naruto again. There's something else, he said. The dimensional membrane is stable. The merging process has been halted and the two planes will begin to separate naturally over the next several hours. By tonight. He paused. The aperture. The return point for Hokage Uzumaki's dimensional seal. It will open at sundown. Naruto went very still. Sundown. He'd arrived, how many days ago? It felt like a week. It felt like an hour. The separation will be complete within 24 hours of aperture opening. Rika continued. After that point, any remaining cross-dimensional presence will be resolved by the natural separation, meaning anyone from one world who remains in the other will be returned automatically. He looked at Naruto. It will not be harmful. But it will be irreversible. Naruto looked at Luffy. Luffy was already looking at him. The rest of the day moved differently after that, colored by the thing approaching, the sundown and the aperture and the separation, the knowledge that the island and the people on it, and the last few days were a temporary country that was already beginning to dissolve at its edges. They ate lunch in the courtyard. All of them, the Straw Hat crew and Naruto and Riku Vale, who sat slightly apart at first and then was gradually, inevitably included by the simple physics of a straw hat meal, which had a centripetal quality that was very difficult to resist and that Riku Vale turned out not to resist particularly hard, once the food was in front of him and Usopp started talking. Usopp was telling a story about the knock-up stream that grew in the telling to approximately twice its actual size. Chopper was completely invested. Brooke contributed a tangential anecdote about a sea king that nobody believed and everyone appreciated. Frankie made a structural observation about the tower's engineering that somehow became a 20-minute discussion about architecture that had Riku Vale, the man who had assembled an island and calibrated dimensional membranes, leaning forward with genuine interest, the scholar in him entirely unable to resist a technical discussion once it was offered. Sanji made ramen. From scratch. In the courtyard, using a portable setup he'd apparently considered sufficiently important to bring from the ship, the dashi going in the stone-walled space and rising in a column of steam that the afternoon wind took and carried through the white trees. Naruto watched this process with an expression that mixed deep appreciation for the craft with the particular nostalgia of someone watching something that reminded them of home. When the bowl was in front of him, he ate it without saying anything. He didn't need to say anything. Some things were communicated perfectly by the silence that followed them. Sanji, with characteristic grace, didn't watch. Zoro, across the courtyard, had been watching Naruto since the ocean. Not constantly, not obviously, just the occasional glance, level and assessing, the way Zoro watched things he was working out the measure of. After lunch he stood and moved to the far edge of the courtyard and Naruto, after a moment, followed. They stood together at the edge of the courtyard looking toward the cliff and the ocean beyond. You held Baryon mode longer than the fight needed, Zoro said. Naruto looked at him sideways. You could have brought it out and done the one technique and been done, Zoro said. You kept it up. Kept going. Yes, Naruto said. Why? Naruto thought about it. The honest answer, not the diplomatic one. Because he deserved the full thing, he said. Not a technique. The full thing. All of me. He looked at the ocean. If he was going to do Gear 5th, I was going to do Baryon mode. Not because I needed to match him. Because it would have been wrong to meet that with anything less than everything I had. Zoro was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. Nothing else. Just that one word. But from Zoro it carried the weight of a long speech about honor and the specific responsibility of the strong toward each other, and Naruto heard all of it. Your captain, Naruto said. Yeah, Zoro said. He's going to make it. Zoro looked at him. I know, he said without a trace of doubt, the confidence of it not arrogant but structural, like saying water flows downhill. I'm glad I fought him, Naruto said. Zoro looked at the ocean for a moment. Then, if things were different. If we were in the same world. Yeah, Naruto said. You'd be worth following, Zoro said. Simply. Completely. It was the highest thing Zoro ever said about anyone who wasn't his captain. Naruto stood with it for a moment. Thank you, he said, which was insufficient and was also exactly right. The sun moved. The afternoon was long and not long enough, the way afternoons were when you were aware of them passing. The crew explored the parts of the island they hadn't reached, Usopp and Chopper in the old marketplace, the well water cool and clean, the stall frames casting long shadows. Robin in the civic quarter with her third book of the trip, reading the carved symbols on every surface she could reach, working through the grammar of a dead language with the focused patience of someone who understood that languages carried people inside them, and if you learn the language you learn the people. Luffy and Naruto went back to the temple. Not to fight. Just to sit in it, the open-air ruin with its cracked mosaic, and its overturned stone and the two carved figures still implied by the empty spaces and the debris. They cleared some of the rubble from around the symbol at the center. Not restoring it, just clearing the space so it was visible. Resolve. They sat on opposite sides of it in the late afternoon light, the sun coming in from the west and hitting the mosaic at an angle that made the pale stone in the symbol glow. Are you afraid of going back? Luffy said. Naruto thought about it. No, he said. I miss it. The village. My people. He paused. But I'm not afraid of going back. He looked at the symbol. Are you afraid of me leaving? No, Luffy said. I'm going to miss fighting you. He said it the way he said everything that was true, without self-consciousness, without the protective layer of indirection that most people wrapped around honest things. I'm going to think about this fight for a long time. Me too, Naruto said. I'm going to think about all of it. He looked at the white bark trees around the temple perimeter. At the sky showing between them, the late afternoon blue of it, the first edge of gold appearing at the horizon. This place. Mirabelle, Luffy said. Yeah. Naruto looked at him. Do you think it'll still be here? After the world's separate? Luffy considered it. He thought about what the island was, assembled from the pieces of a dead world, placed at the intersection of two living ones, built around the principle of resolution. He thought about the lit lanterns on the old road and the warm water in the fountain and the way the ground had closed its fault line when the work was done. I think it'll be wherever it needs to be, he said. Naruto smiled. That's a very you answer. Yeah, Luffy said, grinning. But I think it's right. The sun moved lower. The gold at the horizon deepened. Somewhere over the ocean, the dimensional aperture was building. Naruto could feel it. The same energy signature as the crack that had brought him here, assembling itself in reverse, the seal his team had sent through space and dimensions and the complicated mathematics of crossing doing what it had been built to do. The lanterns on the old road brightened as the sun declined, the dimensional light in them responding to the aperture's presence, the island acknowledging what was coming. Ricuvale came to the temple entrance at some point in the late afternoon and stood there with his notebook. He didn't come inside. He stood at the edge of the arch, looking at the two of them on opposite sides of the cracked mosaic, and his expression was the expression of someone who has been carrying something for a very long time and has found, unexpectedly, that the ground beneath it is solid enough to set it down. He didn't say anything. He left his notebook at the entrance and walked back toward the tower. Naruto looked at the notebook. Then at Luffy. His research, Luffy said. From this. What we did? Yeah, Naruto said. He left it, Luffy said. Naruto looked at the entrance where Riku had been standing. Yeah. He thought about what it meant, a scholar leaving his work. Not his life's work, not the complete archive. The work of this. The documentation of this specific answer to a problem he'd been solving for 30 years. Left here, in this temple, on this island. Someone should have it. He's going to stay, Naruto said. I think so, Luffy said. On this island. It needs someone, Luffy said simply. Naruto looked at the lit lanterns on the road visible through the temple arch. At the warm water in the courtyard fountain. At the tower with its amber window burning steady in the declining light. Yeah, he said. It does. The sun touched the horizon. The aperture opened. It was visible over the ocean to the east, not from Miravel's shore but from its cliff top, which they both went to, the whole crew, all of them, gathering at the cliff edge to watch it appear. A familiar pattern, thin white lines spreading from a central point, the fractures in the visible sky multiplying in the same sequence as before, the cold dimensional light pouring through. Home. On the other side of that cold light, Naruto could feel the natural energy of the elemental nations, the distinct flavor of it, the chakra-saturated air of a world built differently from this one, and the village in it, the leaf symbol and the people and the council table and the ordinary remarkable life he'd built from everything he'd survived. He felt it, and his body said there. He looked at the crew around him. Usopp with his goggles and his slingshot and his enormous, genuine heart. Chopper in his hat. Frankie with his arms crossed and his eyes bright. Brook bowing with one hand on his hat in a gesture of farewell that was more eloquent than most speeches. Sanji with his cigarette and his jacket back on, the fighting angle gone, just the person underneath. Robin with both notebooks, the one Riku had given her and the one from the temple entrance, held carefully. Nami with her climb attacked at her hip and her expression doing the thing it did when she was feeling something she hadn't allocated space for in her emotional budget. And Zoro. Zoro at the edge of the group, not quite in it, arms crossed, eye open, watching Naruto with the level gaze of someone who has given something an honest evaluation and found it worthy. Naruto looked at each of them. Thank you, he said. For the food. For. He stopped. Started again. For being the kind of people who made a stranger feel like the right kind of trouble to be in. Usopp made a sound that was absolutely not crying. Chopper made a sound that was absolutely crying and not attempting to hide it. Come back sometime, Frankie said. Superdimensionally speaking. If I ever figure out how, Naruto said. He looked at Luffy last. Luffy was looking at him with his hat back on. He'd retrieved it from the ship before they came to the cliff, and it was sitting low on his head the way it did when he was being completely himself. No occasion or formality, just Luffy. They looked at each other. There was a lot in it. 2 days and a fight and a meal and a morning on a cliff and a temple and an ocean and the particular understanding that came from meeting someone at their limits and finding out what they were made of. There was the fight and everything the fight had said that words couldn't, and the conversations and everything those had said that the fight couldn't, and the gap between the two of them that was permanent and was also, inexplicably, somehow not the relevant thing. You're going to be king of the pirates, Naruto said. You're going to be the best Hokage, Luffy said. Either of them phrased it as a question. Either of them phrased it as a wish. They said it the way you said things you knew. Luffy, Naruto said. Yeah, Luffy said. When the fight ended. On the water. He looked at him. Did you feel it? The thing the island felt like when the resonance held? Luffy thought about it. The pulse. The chord. The thing that had gone out from the two of them into the water, and the air and the dimensional fabric of two worlds. Yeah, he said. That's what it feels like, Naruto said. When it works. When the thing you're building is actually real. He looked at the aperture over the water. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Thank you for reminding me. Luffy grinned. The aperture waited, cold and bright, patient as the seal that had built it. Naruto turned toward the cliff edge. Chapter 6. The shore of two worlds. The aperture was not a door. Doors implied frames, hinges, the deliberate architecture of passage. The aperture was more like a decision, a place where the dimensional membrane had agreed, temporarily and with conditions, to be something other than a wall. It held its shape in the evening sky over the eastern ocean, the cold light of it steady now, not the urgent fracturing of its first appearance, but something more considered, more intentional. The seal had built it properly this time, the Konoha seal masters on the other side having had the full 72 hours to reinforce the framework of it. Naruto stood at the cliff edge and felt it the way you felt a familiar smell, something in the body recognizing before the mind caught up. The natural energy on the other side was distinct, like a voice you knew in a crowded room, and his body had already oriented toward it the way a compass oriented north, involuntary and complete. He had one foot at the cliff's edge and the rest of himself still on Mirabelle. The split-second weight of that, 1 foot forward, 1 foot where you'd been, had a particular quality he recognized from every significant threshold of his life. The moment before you jumped. The moment that defined not by what came after but by the fact of having arrived at it. He turned around one more time. Not because he'd forgotten anything. Not from hesitation. Just because some things deserved to be looked at fully before you left them. The Straw Hat crew stood along the cliff top in the late evening light. The white trees behind them caught the last of the sun and threw it back gold, and the stone lanterns of the old road below the cliff burned their dimensional light steadily, and the tower at the island's center had its amber window and its patient glow, and all of it together, the island, the crew, the specific quality of this particular evening on a world that wasn't his, was the kind of thing that printed itself without asking permission. He was going to remember this. He was going to remember Chopper's hat, and Frankie's arms, and Brooks' bow, and Robin's books, and Usopp's absolute heroic noise, and Sanji's cooking, and Zoro's silence that meant more than most people's speeches. He was going to remember the black sand, and the white trees, and the fountain in the courtyard, and the mosaic symbol under his feet in the ruined temple. He was going to remember Luffy standing on the water in the early morning telling him there were no rules in the flattest, most completely honest voice he'd ever heard. Naruto looked at all of it. He took a breath that was, if he was being honest with himself, slightly slower than it needed to be. Then he looked at Luffy. Luffy was looking at him with his hat low and his hands in his pockets, standing at the cliff edge with the specific quality of presence he had when he was paying complete attention, which was easy to miss because it looked identical to when he was paying no attention at all, except for something behind the eyes, something that was always fully present even when the surface of him was doing something apparently unrelated. "Go home, Naruto," Luffy said. 3 words. The simplicity of them was deliberate and complete. Not goodbye and not good luck and not any of the other things the moment could have asked for. Just the fact of it, said warmly, said certainly, by someone who understood that some people needed to be told to go home not because they didn't want to but because wanting to and going were different actions and sometimes the gap between them required a very small push. Naruto smiled. He turned back to the aperture. He jumped. The crossing was not painful and not instantaneous. It lasted approximately 4 seconds, which was long enough to be aware of the transition, the dimensional membrane thin and cold around him, the pressure of it even and omnidirectional, the natural energy of both worlds present and distinct for one brief overlapping moment before the seal's framework completed its work and the elemental nations came up solid and real around him. He landed in the field outside Konoha. Grass under his feet. The specific smell of the fire country air, pine and stone and the faint sulfur trace of the hot springs to the north, and underneath all of it the deep, living chakra scent of a world built on life force, rich and familiar in a way that went past comfort into something more fundamental. He stood there for a second. The aperture closed behind him with a sound that was very soft, like a page turning. Then, from 20 feet ahead of him across the field, a voice. "You're 6 minutes late." Shikamaru was leaning against a tree at the field's edge with his arms folded and his expression doing the thing it did when he was deeply relieved about something and was expressing that relief as mild annoyance, because Shikamaru's emotional vocabulary had been translated into that register so thoroughly over the years that there was essentially no functional difference. Naruto looked at him. The dimensional calibration was. He started. "I don't want to hear it," Shikamaru said, pushing off the tree and walking toward him. "You fell through a dimensional crack into another universe, apparently single-handedly stabilized the merging of two-dimensional planes, had a fight that I'm told registered on our sensory equipment as something unprecedented, and came back 6 minutes late." He stopped in front of Naruto and looked at him for a moment with the flat, perceptive gaze that missed nothing and communicated everything. "You look terrible." "I look great," Naruto said. "You look like someone who used baryon mode." "I'm fine." "You're going to sleep for 16 hours." "I'm fine," Naruto said again, with the particular conviction of a person who was, in fact, going to sleep for 16 hours and was choosing to address that fact in the future tense. Shikamaru looked at him for another moment. Then, very briefly, with the economy of someone for whom emotional expression was a resource to be deployed precisely, he put one hand on Naruto's shoulder. "Just for a second." Firm. Present. "Welcome back," he said. "Yeah," Naruto said. "Good to be back." They walked toward the village. The gates of Konoha appeared through the trees, lit by the last of the evening light, the Hokage monument beyond them in shadow, 5 faces carved into the mountain. His face would go up there someday. He hadn't spent much time thinking about that. He thought about it now, briefly, and it meant something different than it had before he'd left. Not more, not less. Different. The way things meant different things after you'd met someone who understood them from the outside. "Shikamaru," he said. "What?" "If you met someone, from somewhere completely different. Someone with no framework for anything you knew, and no context for anything that mattered to you. And in 2 days you..." He stopped. Tried to find the right approach. "How do you explain what that means? When someone sees you completely? From outside everything?" Shikamaru was quiet for about 30 steps. "You can't explain it," he said finally. "You just carry it." Naruto thought about that. "Yeah," he said. They walked through the gate. Back on Miravel, the cliff top was quiet. The aperture had closed cleanly, no residual light, no fracture lines, just the evening sky resuming its ordinary character, the first stars appearing at the zenith in the slow and reliable way of stars that had been doing this for longer than any of the civilizations that had looked up at them. The crew stood at the cliff edge for a moment after it closed. Not from grief, from the particular weight of a significant thing having ended, the need to let the ending occupy its proper space before moving on from it. Usopp was the first to break it. "So," he said, "did we just, we helped save 2 dimensions?" "Yes," Robin said. 2 dimensions, Usopp repeated. He looked at the sky where the aperture had been. Then at his hands. Then at the sky again. "I feel like that should come with some kind of certificate. Or at minimum a plaque. The dimensional membrane stabilization is its own reward," Frankie said. "That's not how rewards work," Usopp said. "It is when the alternative is reality dissolving," Frankie said. "Both of those things can be true," Chopper said. Brook played a small, elegant phrase on his violin, a musical full stop, the sound of something properly concluded. Zoro had already turned away from the cliff and was walking back toward the old road. "Food," he said, which was all he said, which was, from Zoro, a fairly comprehensive statement about what came after significant events. "You ate, you rested," you continued. Sanji was already moving. The crew followed their captain's example, which was to say they moved through the ending of things and toward the next thing with the forward momentum of people who had learned, in the particular school of following Luffy, that forward was always the right direction. Luffy stayed at the cliff edge. He stood there after the rest of them had gone, looking at the place in the sky where the aperture had been. His hands were in his pockets and his hat was low, and the wind off the Grand Line moved through the usual evening escalation, picking up with the sun's decline, pulling at the red edges of his vest. He stood there long enough that the stars filled in properly. Not from sadness. He wasn't sad. Grief and Luffy had a complicated relationship, partly because he'd made his peace with the cost of caring about things being the depth of the caring, and partly because Luffy's relationship with time was fundamentally different from most people's. He experienced the present with such completeness that the past, when it receded into a form that was stored rather than lost. He carried things whole. He was carrying this whole. The fight on the cliff and the fight on the ocean. The mosaic symbol under their feet in the temple. The sound of Naruto laughing on the figurehead their first night, and on the cliff this morning, and on the water after the resonance when they were both flat on their backs looking at the sky and the Grand Line was moving gently beneath them. The specific quality of fighting someone at their absolute limit, and finding out that their absolute limit was something genuine, not performance, not strategy, something as fundamental and as personal as anything could be. He thought about Rick Vale and his third world and his 30 years of trying to prevent a mistake that had already happened. He thought about what it cost to carry something that large for that long, and he thought about what it had looked like when Rika had set the notebook down at the temple entrance and walked back to his tower, and he decided, without needing to examine the decision, that the man was going to be okay on this island. That the island and the man deserved each other in the way that specific people deserved specific places. The right fit, the right purpose, arrived at by the long way around. The first stars were very bright tonight. The Grand Line air was clear and cold and full of the smell of the ocean and the black sand below. "Luffy!" Sanji's voice, from somewhere below the cliff on the old road. "Food!" Luffy turned around. He grinned at the empty cliff top, at the closed sky and the stars and the spot where a person who would have made an excellent rival and had turned out to be something harder to name had stepped off the edge of this world and back into their own. He ran back toward the road. Rika Vale had dinner with them. Sanji had made it clear, without quite saying so, that there was enough for everyone and that everyone meant everyone on the island, including the dimensional scholar who had spent the last 30 years alone and who ate the way people ate when they were used to cooking for one and had forgotten that meals could be about more than caloric sufficiency. He ate slowly. He tasted things. At one point he looked at his bowl with an expression that was almost comically private, the expression of someone having an experience they hadn't budgeted for emotionally. Sanji did not comment on this expression. Some gifts were best given without acknowledgement. The dinner was on the Sunny's deck, because the ship was where the galley was and the galley was where Sanji worked and Sanji working was the gravitational center of any Straw Hat gathering. The island was lit all around them, the lanterns on the old road, the amber window of the tower, the stars above, and the bioluminescence that had appeared in the water around the Sunny's hull sometime in the last hour, soft blue-green. The ocean doing something beautiful for no particular reason except that Grand Line oceans sometimes did. They ate. They talked. Rika Vale, who had been, in all previous interactions, a contained and deliberate presence, turned out, once fed and with the 30-year weight of his mission's primary phase completed, to have opinions. Strong, specific, intellectually alive opinions about dimensional theory and the nature of consciousness and the relationship between will and physical reality and several other topics that had Robin's complete attention for the better part of 2 hours and that Usopp contributed to with genuine enthusiasm despite understanding approximately 40% of the technical content. Frankie understood more than 40% of the technical content and asked good questions. This clearly surprised Riku, who recalibrated his conversational register mid-sentence when he realized the cyborg man in the loud shirt was tracking the theoretical framework as well as the applications. Chopper listened to everything and took small mental notes in the way he did when something might be medically relevant later. Brook played softly throughout, the background music of a good evening. Zoro fell asleep at the railing, which was his way of being present. Nami charted. Not obsessively. She'd reached the stage of her Mirabelle documentation where the major measurements were taken, and what remained was the work of a careful evening rather than an urgent day. She drew the island's shape from memory, augmented by her morning sketches, filled in the features: old road, civic quarter, marketplace, temple, tower, cliff, black sand shore, and wrote its name in her precise navigator's hand at the top of the page. Mirabelle. She looked at the name for a moment. Then she wrote underneath it, smaller, assembled from a third world. Placed at the intersection of two. Held together by the meeting of two wills that recognized each other. She looked at what she'd written. She didn't cross it out. Luffy was sitting on the figurehead eating dessert. Sanji had made something involving the island's red fruit, the ones Luffy had been eating all day that Nami had confiscated and then returned when Robin identified them as non-toxic and high in something apparently beneficial, and watching the bioluminescence in the water below with the full presence he gave to beautiful things. Which was his whole face and his whole attention, and the specific stillness of someone who found rest in looking, rather than in closing their eyes. Rick Vale came to stand near the figurehead toward the end of the evening. He stood for a while without speaking, which was the kind of silence that had content in it. "You knew," he said to Luffy finally. "Before I came down from the tower today. You knew the fight couldn't end the way I planned it." "Not before," Luffy said. "During. When did you know?" Luffy thought about it. "When we were on the water," he said. "And the membrane resonated. I felt it go out. Both of us together. And I thought, this isn't one of us winning. This is both of us being real." Riku was quiet. "You built a very good island," Luffy said. "Even if you were wrong about why." Riku looked at Mirabelle, the lit road, the white trees, the tower. "I built it from everything I had left," he said. "That's why it works," Luffy said. Riku looked at him. "Things built from everything you have," Luffy said with the simple certainty that he brought to things he knew in his bones, "are better than things built from what you plan to use. Because you can plan to use a lot of things. But what you actually have is what's real." Rick Vale, scholar of dimensions, architect of Mirabelle, keeper of a dead world's history, stood on the deck of the Thousand Sunny and looked at a 17-year-old pirate who had just described the central truth of everything he'd spent 30 years learning in the time it took to finish a piece of fruit. "Yes," he said. "I think that's correct." He looked back at the tower. "I'll stay," he said. "I know," Luffy said. "The island will need..." Riku started. "It needs you," Luffy said. "The same way you need it." Riku was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you," he said. "For not being what I expected." "What did you expect?" Luffy said, with genuine curiosity. Riku considered it. "A force," he said. "A magnitude. A will that could anchor a dimensional plane. I expected something large and inhuman." "I'm pretty big," Luffy said, perfectly seriously. Riku Vale, for the first time in what might have been a very long time, laughed. Not the controlled exhale of academic amusement. A real laugh, surprised out of him, brief and genuine and human in a way that changed the quality of his face completely, showed the person underneath the scholar's careful surfaces. It lasted 3 seconds and left him looking slightly astonished at himself. Luffy grinned. "Go to bed," Luffy said. "You've been awake for a long time." Riku looked at him for a moment. Then he inclined his head, not quite a bow, but in that direction, a gesture of genuine respect expressed in the formal register of a man who had spent most of his adult life alone, and wasn't entirely fluent in the casual grammar of it. He walked down the gangplank to the island. He crossed the courtyard. The fountain caught the starlight and moved it around. The old road lanterns lit his path. He entered the tower. The amber window burned steadily. It would burn, Luffy decided, for a long time. The separation of the worlds began overnight. Not dramatically. Not with the urgency of the merging or the urgency of its resolution. Riku had said the separation would be gradual, natural, over 24 hours, and that was exactly what it was, the dimensional membrane at the Miravel node resuming its proper structure, the two planes drawing apart as gently and as certainly as tide withdrawing. By morning, the quality of the air on the island had shifted very slightly. The specific resonance that had characterized the intersection zone, the feeling of two worlds present simultaneously, began to fade. Nami felt it first, in her instruments. The log pose settled. The barometric gradient across the island flattened. The atmospheric boundary she noted between the tower and the cliff smoothed itself away. The island was still navigationally anomalous. It occupied no charted position and was producing no magnetic signature that corresponded to the Grand Line's established field, but the dimensional strangeness of it was receding, leaving behind something that was simply an extraordinary island in a remarkable ocean, which was, on the Grand Line, not an exceptional category. She wrote the new measurements down. She looked at her chart of Miravel. Then she added one more note, at the bottom, in small letters: "This island will not appear on any other chart. It is not meant to be found. It is meant to be arrived at." She folded the chart carefully. She put it in the special section of her map case, not the working charts, not the navigational references, but the section that held the other things, the maps of places that existed outside the ordinary understanding of what a place was. Morning on the island was different from the previous mornings. The white trees were the same. The black sand was the same. The lanterns on the old road were dark now, their dimensional light withdrawn with the separation process, their stone bodies patient and cold and ready, Nami thought, to be lit again by whatever came to the island next. The fountain in the courtyard still held its warm water, moving very gently. But there was a quietness to Miravel that hadn't been present before, the particular quiet of a place that has completed something and is now simply being itself, without the weight of unfinished purpose. Luffy spent the morning on the island. He went alone, the crew stayed on the ship, giving him the space without being asked, because they were good at reading what was needed. He walked the old road in the morning light, looking at the dark lanterns and the carved symbols on the trees and the ruins of the marketplace where the wells still worked and the stall frames still cast their geometric shadows. He went to the temple. The mosaic was still cracked, some things the resolution hadn't restored, the physical record of the fight maintained in the stone, the two halves of the symbol present and legible. He stood on the symbol for a while. He thought about what Robin had said it meant. The resolution that comes after two forces meet and neither destroys the other. He looked at the two implied spaces in the debris, the places where the carved figures had been before the final exchange shattered the section around them. He didn't try to clear it. Some ruins were better as ruins. They told the story of what had happened better than any restoration could. He went to the cliff. The fault line was closed. The stone was solid underfoot. The ocean below was the ordinary Grand Line ocean, indifferent and enormous and completely itself, and the sky above was clear and very high, and the horizon in every direction was empty. He stood there for a while. He thought about the fight. He'd spent the morning carrying it, the way he'd said he would, whole, complete, all of it present simultaneously. The temple and the cliff and the ocean and Gear 5th and Baryon mode and the resonance pulse, and lying on the water afterward looking at the sky with everything spent and everything, somehow, completely full. He thought about what Naruto had said at the end. That's what it feels like. When it works. When the thing you're building is actually real. Luffy looked at the horizon. He was going to be king of the pirates. He'd known this since he was 7 years old and Shanks had put the hat on his head and sailed away, and knowing it was not the same as accomplishing it, he understood that completely, had understood it for a long time, but the knowing was the foundation under everything. The direction. He thought about what it meant that someone from another world, someone who had their own direction, their own foundation, their own mountain of impossible things already climbed, had looked at him across the water and said, "You're going to make it." Not as encouragement. Not as kind words between people who had fought well together. As the statement of someone who had looked at a person clearly and seen what was there. Naruto had seen what was there. Luffy stood at the cliff edge and that mattered to him in a way he didn't have words for and didn't need words for because he wasn't a words person, He was an actions person, and the action it had produced was already happening. Something in him had settled, some previously restless frequency had found its anchor, the way the dimensional membrane had found its anchor, and it was going to be steady for a long time. He turned around and walked back to the ship. They left Mirabel at midday. No ceremony to the departure. No lingering at the gangplank. Nami had the route plotted, she'd identified, from the island's position and the restored behavior of her log pose, approximately where they were relative to the Grand Line's established routes, and she had opinions about the best direction, and everyone was going to hear those opinions whether they'd solicited them or not. The anchor came up. The sails went out. The Thousand Sunny caught the Grand Line wind with the specific joy of a ship that was good at what it did and knew it. Luffy was on the figurehead. He always was. He watched Mirabel recede behind them, the island growing small on the water, the tower's dark spire still visible for a long time because of its height, the amber window indistinct at distance but implied. He watched it until it was too small to see clearly, and then until it was the idea of a shape, and then until it was a point at the horizon, and then until it wasn't. The Grand Line was itself again around them. Nami's log pose locked onto the magnetic field ahead. The weather built on the southern horizon in a completely different configuration from anything that had happened over Mirabel. Ordinary Grand Line weather with its ordinary Grand Line indifference to what humans found convenient. Zoro was training on the deck behind Luffy. The sound of it was familiar, the controlled exhale, the rhythm of repetitions, the complete self-containment of a man for whom training was not preparation but expression. He trained the way he breathed, with the same necessity and the same lack of performance. He'd said, when they were pulling the anchor, "Good fight." He'd said it in Luffy's direction but without looking at him, the way Zoro gave things he meant deeply, sideways, in passing, as though the importance of it was inversely proportional to the directness with which it was delivered. Luffy had said, "Yeah," and that had been the full conversation, and it had been complete. Usopp materialized beside him on the figurehead, moving with the particular caution of someone who had learned the hard way that Luffy's relationship with the figurehead was proprietary but negotiable if you approached correctly. He settled beside him and looked at the ocean ahead, and they sat in companionable silence for a minute. "Hey," Usopp said. "Hey," Luffy said. "How do you feel?" Luffy thought about it honestly. "Good," he said. "Full." Usopp considered this. He'd learned over years that Luffy's descriptions of his own internal states were precise even when they sounded simple, and that the right response to them was to receive the precision rather than ask for elaboration that wasn't going to come. "Good," he said. "We should train more," Luffy said. "Speak for yourself," Usopp said immediately. "I mean me," Luffy said. "I need to train more." Usopp looked at him. You literally, you fought someone in Gear 5th for long enough to stabilize a dimensional membrane. You are a person who does that. And he was in Baryon mode," Luffy said. "And we tied." "That's, Luffy, a tie between those two things is a tie," Luffy said. "Which means there's something I'm not seeing yet." He looked at the ocean ahead, at the route Nami had charted and the Grand Line water spreading to meet it. "I want to find it." Usopp stared at him for a long moment. "You know," he said, "most people, after saving 2 dimensions, would take the afternoon off." "I am taking the afternoon off," Luffy said. "I'm sitting here. And thinking about training." "Yes," Luffy said, as though this were the definition of taking the afternoon off. Usopp sighed with the full-body commitment of someone who had been doing this for years and found it both exhausting and completely correct. "Fine," he said. "But first you should eat something. Sanji made lunch." Luffy was off the figurehead before the sentence finished. 3 days later, the log pose found the next island. It was called Draven's Shelf, an old marine fortress island, long abandoned, now occupied by a settlement of former pirates who traded in the life for something slower and were not entirely committed to being left alone about that. Nami had intel on a treasure vault beneath the old fortress, Robin had historical interest in its marine archives, and Zoro had apparently heard something about a swordsman there worth fighting, the sourcing of which intelligence Luffy didn't ask about because Zoro's intelligence network was one of those things that functioned better without examination. The island appeared on the horizon on the morning of the third day. Normal. Real. A Grand Line island with a magnetic signature, and a geological history and weather that was specifically weird to it, and nowhere else. No dimensional fractures. No assembled ruins. No amber windows burning in dark towers. Luffy looked at it from the figurehead. He felt the familiar lift, the forward pull of a new island, new people, new complications, the ongoing work of the Grand Line and what he was doing out here. The direction in him clear and steady. He pulled his hat down. "Nami," he said. "Already on it," Nami said from the helm. "Sanji." "Food's done," Sanji said from the kitchen hatch. "Eat before we land." "I mean it. All of you." "Zoro." A snore from the direction of the mast. "He's awake," Robin said without looking up from her book. "I know," Luffy said. He looked at the island coming toward them and thought, briefly, about another morning on another island, standing at a cliff edge with someone who was home now, in their own world, their own village, their own office with its Hokage hat, and its council table and its ordinary, remarkable daily life. He thought about the blonde hair and the whisker marks and the enormous laugh and the baryon mode burning gold on the open water. He thought, go be the best Hokage. He thought it not as a wish, as the acknowledgement of something already in motion. Then the island was close enough to see its details. The old fortress walls, the settlement clustered at its base, the lights in its harbor, the life of it, and Luffy stood up on the figurehead with both feet on the lion's head and his hat pulled down, and the Grand Line wind in his face. "Let's go," he said. The Thousand Sunny sailed on. In Konoha, 16 hours after his return, Naruto woke up. He'd made it to his apartment. He had a vague memory of Shikamaru guiding him through the village gate and of Hinata being there, her hands warm and real and present in the way that home was present, solid and immediate and completely true, and then his bed, and then nothing for 16 hours. He woke to morning light through his window and the smell of breakfast that Hinata had made without waking him, left on the table with a note in her handwriting that said, "Eat first, report second, missions third, everything else after." He sat at his table and ate the breakfast and read the note 3 more times because it was a perfect note. Then he looked at his hands. The baryon mode cost was there, subtle, a faint depletion that would resolve over days, the life force expenditure metabolized slowly and completely. He'd used less of it than he had in the war. He was going to be fine. He was already mostly fine. He looked at his hands and thought about the fight. He thought about all of it. The temple and the cliff and the ocean, the same way he thought about things that mattered, not cataloging them, just letting them be present, alive, the full-dimensional memory of an experience that had been entirely real. He thought about the feeling of Gear 5's presence on the water, the Conqueror's hockey ambient and vast and somehow warm, and the way it had not been threatening but had been one of the most clarifying things he'd ever felt, the pure, unmistakable quality of someone who was exactly what they were. He thought about the pulse. The resonance going out from both of them, the two wills finding the frequency of the dimensional membrane and hitting it together, the feeling of something enormous and good moving through the world because two people had decided to be completely honest with each other about what they had. He thought about Luffy saying same to you to don't hold back, the simplest possible answer, the most complete. He opened his office window. The village was below, the rooftops and the streets and the people moving through the morning with their ordinary lives, all of it his to protect, his to serve, the thing he'd built himself into and would keep building. He looked at the Hokage monument. His face wasn't up there yet. Someday. He thought, you're going to be king of the pirates. Said it to no one? To the morning. To the direction of a world that was on the other side of a dimensional membrane that was stable and whole and carefully maintained by an island that shouldn't exist and the scholar who lived in its tower. He said it the way you said things you knew. Then he put his Hokage hat on. It sat on his head the way it always did, slightly too large, a little ceremonial, very heavy in ways that had nothing to do with the material it was made from. He'd been wearing it for 8 months. He was getting used to its weight. He left his office and went to find Shikamaru, because there was apparently a report to give and council members to brief and a dimensional incident to explain to people who were going to have a lot of very detailed questions, and the answer to most of those questions was going to be some version of I fought someone, and we figured it out, which was not, Naruto was aware, technically a sufficient description of dimensional membrane stabilization, but was also, underneath the technical language, what had actually happened. He walked through Konoha in the morning light. The village was the same. The streets were the same, the people were the same, the smell of it, and the sound of it, and the whole familiar weight of the place he'd grown up in and fought for and built and chosen again and again every time the choice presented itself. The same. And also, the way things were always the same and also different, after something had happened that changed the measure you used to understand them, somehow slightly larger than it had been before he'd left. Like a room you leave at one size and return to and find has more space in it than you remembered. Not because the room changed. Because you did? He walked through it, and it was large and familiar and completely, reliably, genuinely home. He was almost at the council building when he stopped. A kid, maybe 9 years old, dark hair, already wearing a forehead protector that was slightly askew, was in the street ahead of him, in a standoff with 3 older kids who had the particular aggressive body language of people who had picked on someone because they thought they could. The dark-haired kid had their feet planted and their chin up and their hands and fists at their sides. Not backing down. Naruto had been that kid. Naruto had been that kid 100 times, in every weather, in every season, on every street in this village. The older kids looked up and saw the Hokage. The aggressive body language evaporated with almost comedic speed, the instantaneous recalibration of people who have been caught doing something small in the presence of something very large. The dark-haired kid looked up too. Their eyes were enormous. Naruto looked at them for a second. He thought about a straw hat on a ship and an ocean, and the way some things were the same in every world. He smiled. Full width, the one that meant he meant it. Nice stance, he said to the kid. Keep your back foot grounded more, though. You're putting all your weight forward. He demonstrated with his own foot. See? Like that. The kid looked at their feet. Adjusted. Yeah, Naruto said. That's it. He walked on. Behind him, he heard the older kids retreating with the particular shuffling pace of people trying to leave without looking like they were leaving, and he heard the dark-haired kids' footsteps as they ran off in the opposite direction, lighter and faster, the run of someone who had just been seen by someone who mattered. He walked through the village. Above him, the sky was clear and blue and entirely unbroken, no fracture lines, no cold dimensional light, no apertures or membranes visible to the naked eye. Somewhere very far away, in a completely different direction than any compass could point, a ship with a lion's head figurehead was sailing toward a new island on a sea that didn't make sense and had never needed to. The 2 worlds moved in their separate courses, held in their proper planes by an island that shouldn't exist and the stable, ringing memory of a resonance that had been, for a few extraordinary hours, the most honest thing in 2 dimensions. The shore of 2 worlds receded behind them both. They carried it whole.